This is an age-old prayer dating back to nearly 3,000 years old, and it is that prayer of trust in those who govern. In you I take refuge, let me never be put to shame. In your justice set me free. Hear me and speedily rescue me. Be a rock of refuge for me, a mighty stronghold to save me. You are my rock, my stronghold. For your name's sake, lead us and guide us. Release us from the snares that have been hidden, for you are our refuge, and into your hands we commend our spirits, and it is you who will redeem us. Okay. That's it.
Please note that this meeting is being filmed for subsequent broadcast on the Council's website. Therefore, by entering the chamber and sitting anywhere except in the public gallery, you are consenting to being filmed and to the use of those images and sound recordings for broadcasting and/or training purposes, as your images cannot be removed post-recording. If you're a member of the public and do not wish to have your image captured, you should sit in the appropriate seats in the public gallery at the rear of the chamber. If you have any queries regarding this, please speak to one of the council staff after the meeting. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Apologies from Councillor Fraser, Councillor Henry and Councillor Skeet.
Madam Mayor, Councillor David Dean, who's become unwell since eating something that disagreed with him earlier today.
Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Are the minutes agreed as a correct record? We will now deal with the only item for tonight, the Business Plan 2020 to 2024. I will briefly go through how I intend to proceed, so all councillors and members of the public will understand the procedure for this meeting. Firstly, the council will receive a presentation from the Director of Corporate Services on the Business Plan report. Once the Director of Corporate Services has finished, I will invite councillors to ask questions about the report. As indicated to the group leaders previously, I will be following the order as used for member questions at ordinary council meetings. I have allocated 20 minutes for this item, which should allow the expected 12 questions across the parties to be asked, and I will ensure that there is time for all of those to be asked. However, if time should allow, I will happily take any further questions to the Director based on other names provided, and I will rotate as before. The next part of the meeting will be the speeches by the four group leaders, starting with the Leader of the Council, Councillor Alan Brittis, moving the substantive budget report. I will then invite members of the Cabinet to comment on the report before us. We will then take any amendments on the budget report. Once all of the amendments have been moved and seconded and are on the table, I will open up the meeting for the main debate. I will invite members to speak in turn based on the order provided by each group in a rotating fashion between each group. At the conclusion of the main debate, I will then take each of the amendments and call for a vote on each individually. Once all the amendments have been agreed or fallen, I will then invite the leader to move the substantive report to be voted upon. Finally, just a reminder that all votes this evening will be taken via roll call in line with the Council's constitution. With all that having been explained and everyone clear, I would like to invite the Director of Corporate Services to address the Chamber.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I present to you tonight the budget for 2021 and the business plan for 2024. There is a wealth of information in the papers, not forgetting the information pack that you have carried round to Cabinet, scrutiny meetings, and now this Council meeting. Last year, I talked about the fog of Brexit and the approach the Bank of England took, that whilst they were planning on a smooth exit, if things change, they would change their forecast. And I commented that we, as a local authority, did not have that luxury. So in relation to this year's budget, for those in the chamber old enough to remember, the fog has descended into a pea soup. It's not just Brexit. We have left, but the work is now starting on trade, immigration, and other agreements which will have impacts on our services and our residents. We have had over 24,000 EU residents in Merton successfully confirm either their settled or pre-settled status, which is really good news. Last year I mentioned that we were at the end of a 4-year settlement, but should have the spending review and the fair funding review outcomes to factor into this year's MTFS. As you will know, this has not happened. We've got a 1-year settlement, mainly what finance colleagues have referred to as a rollover plus. This has helped for 2021, but not for the medium term. It does not allow for realistic planning when we do not know the size of the cake that all local authorities will have, let alone our share of it. We may get more information on the size of the cake in the budget next week. But in the interim, I, as your Section 151 officer, have to satisfy myself and you that the budgets are robust and there is an adequate level of reserves. I have taken a prudent long-term approach as there's been much talk of levelling up the funding to other parts of the country. But at this moment in time, it does not appear that there will be extra money to the system, but money transitioned away from local authorities to fund that levelling up. And recent publications have shown a particularly negative impact for London. There was also the business rates retention scheme. The reforms in 2021 were meant to go to 100% retention. This has also been delayed for a year. London was not allowed to continue as a pilot under the 75% scheme, and so whilst all London boroughs have agreed to stay within a pool, this will now be a 67% scheme, with 37% going to the GLA, 33% to central government, and local boroughs retaining 30%. So this means there will be further reductions in the pooled monies available to us. We still do not have the final outcome of the 2018-19 business rates pool due to the delays that some authorities have had in getting their accounts audited. The business rates reset has also been delayed. The last reset was in 2017, and we still have outstanding appeals from then and the previous reset, which adds to the uncertainty for our business ratepayers and longer-term planning. The long-term future of business rates as a source of finance for local government has also been raised as an issue, and there is talk of a fundamental review, but a source of funding will be required if the quantum of business rates goes into decline. The Green Paper on social care has been delayed from summer 2017 with no proposed publication date. The Conservative manifesto refers to a commitment to urgently seek a cross-party consensus in order to bring forward the necessary proposal and legislation for long-term reform. There is no indication currently of the timing for this. So for the MTFS, we have assumed that the social care grants continue over the next few years, but this may not be the case. Then we come to the issue of the funding of the DSG deficit going forward. Our recovery plan, or non-recovery plan, as it was still 66 million in deficit by the end of 23-24, assumes certain level of grants continue and has impacts of measures to expand our special schools to reduce the percentage of places in independent schools. This has been a growing issue across the country, but now the deficits are beginning to be material in the terms of the accounts and are now exercising our external auditors. So whilst the response from the DFE is welcome, simply expecting the General Fund not to have to cover the DSG deficit without Secretary of State approval is only half the answer. The key issue is how the government expects councils and schools to fund the shortfalls and whether they will increase funding in this area. In the interim, there is a very real risk that the deficit will exceed our general reserve provision, materially impacting on the Council's financial viability and our value for money conclusion, even with our reserve to offset this in the short term, alongside potential qualification of the accounts. So we've had the difficulty of funding not keeping pace with demographic growth, particularly in social care and schools, and in particular the education, health and social care plans. Some of the costs associated with these are picked up by the General Fund, and some of the 5 million growth for the children's schools and families is for additional transport costs and additional social workers in this area. The annual review with Veolia has also led to some additional growth, which is not something we've had a significant level for some years in the MTFS, so it's led to some additional challenges for me. We will also bring back later in the year the actions and potential costs for complying with the Council's Climate Emergency Declaration. Within the papers in front of you tonight are the revised corporate indicators, highlighting what we see as important for the Council as a whole to monitor. It has our revised risk management strategy. Our approach is informed and cautious, but we do recognise that a higher level of risk may need to be accepted to support innovation. The procurement strategy sets out the major procurement exercises for next year, to which Bishops of Bridge will be added. The papers also set out how the position has changed from those presented to you last March, and there have been updates to Cabinet each time there has been a change. So officers have been working on the proposals for the MTFS from 2017-18, alongside Cabinet members and scrutiny panels, to help shape the services for our residents and visitors, to deliver the services they need, they value, the ones they complain about, and the ones they don't realise that we provide, and some services they clearly don't want, but we choose to do so or have a legal responsibility to provide. It has been shaped in many ways, either by simply being in the borough and becoming liable for council tax, to having children who require and accessing our schools with over 91% rated good or outstanding by Ofsted, to being a borough with 18% of open space, to having rubbish and green waste collected, to using our libraries, particularly Collier's Wood and the new leisure centre, our children's centres, and our new school due to open in September, and for those in the borough who require our adult social care services. In considering the budget for 2021, with the possible reduction or alteration of service provision, members must also consider the public sector equality duty under the Equality Act 2010. The Council must, when exercising its functions, have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, harassment and victimisation and other conduct prohibited by the Equality Act, and to advance equality of opportunity and foster good relations between those who share a protected characteristic under the Act and those who do not share a protected characteristic. The budget decision is not the final decision affecting the provision of an element of service, and individual savings proposals are not set in stone. A detailed assessment of the impact of savings proposals will be undertaken if required when specific policies have been formulated. We have a balanced budget for 2021, a small gap in 21-22, but rising in 22-23 and 23-24 to over £9 million, subject to the P-Super of funding. Future increases in council tax at the maximum level currently allowed have been built in to reduce the gaps to these levels. We have again been able to use the balance in the budget reserve to smooth the impact on the bottom line over the short and medium term, but this is now estimated to be fully utilised in 21-22. Our capital programme sets out the necessary long-term investment in our assets up to 2029, helping us to respond to those demographic changes referred to earlier by expanding primary, secondary schools and now our special schools, regenerating our town centres. Linked to this is our Treasury Management Strategy, which shows our approach to borrowing and financing of the capital programme. We have reviewed the schemes, the profiling and funding of the programme to reduce the associated revenue impact as a consequence over the MTFS. Clearly, the work on our pension fund strategy has helped with our 103% funding level, up from the 94% funding when we were 8th in the country, and the release of funding back to the General Fund of some 2.5 million. The use of reserves and balances has been set out and show their use over time, both on a revenue and capital basis. However, this has been complicated by the DSG deficit and spending review reserve offset. I have reviewed the level of general fund balances and set out the revised information in the report, and will review in light of our overall outturn position. Merton has earmarked reserves which are being used to fund apprentices, major system developments, welfare support, as well as smoothing the gap, so services have time to plan for major change. These reserves are not available to fund ongoing expenditure requirements, and the current level is not out of kilter with our outer London neighbours. So I am your Section 151 officer with overall responsibility for presenting to you tonight to approve a business plan, a medium-term financial strategy and a balanced budget for 2021, and a proposed adult social care precept of 2% and a 1.99% increase in the core element of the council tax. We also have the responsibility towards our local taxpayers to the legislation which dates back from 1906, so clearly a long time before many of us in the chamber here. So therefore, in closing, the report in front of you shows a balanced revenue budget for 2021, a council tax of £1,176.92, capital budget of 47 million, 66 million in future years, and the MTFS Capital and Treasury Management Strategy, along with prudential indicators for you to agree tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Now on to member questions to the Director of Corporate Services. I'm going to start with Councillor Chung. Do you have a question?
I do, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question, a lot of us are very angry about the government's failure to fully fund education for children with special needs and disabilities, and that this has led to us having to set aside money from the Dedicated School Grant, DSG. Question, can you just reiterate how much the council could lose out by if we have to pay the full extra cost of DSG rather than the government? And what impact there would be on our finances if the government did the decent thing and fully fund special education needs and disability services? Thank you.
So the impact of the DSG deficit was set out in the Cabinet Papers in January, with both the plan and the impact on the budget reported to that same meeting. So as I've mentioned earlier, that deficit showed £66 million, and we set out 5 options in the budget papers with a range of assumptions from additional 5 million up to potentially 59 million. That was the worst case of scenario of no further grant, and the General Fund and Merton being fully liable for that. By choosing one of the options there, we have assumed there will be some additional funding coming forward in future years, but we are still awaiting the other piece of the jigsaw from SIPFA and the NAO in response to their consultation paper by the DFE. That's not due now to be issued until the next financial year. So if there was further funding to come forward to cover the cost of that, then there would be £37 million available to us over the next 4 years.
Councillor Adam Bush, do you have a question?
I do, Madam Mayor, thank you. How has the core spending power of the council changed across the financial years 18-19 to 19-20? And the forecast for 2021, and what is the numerical value of the same increases, and what is the most recent annual or current CPI rate of inflation as set out in the council budget papers? Thank you.
So for those in the gallery, I'll try and make it sort of quite clear with the numbers that refer to the particular years. So for 18-19, 19-20 and the forecast for 2021, the core spending power is 139.6 million, 142.2 million and 150.8 million respectively. So the increases between the years, there was a reduction to get to the 18-19 figure, but an increase then between 18-19 and 19-20 of 2.7 and a further £8.5 million increase. The CPI rate that we have referred to in the budget papers was the December one. That was the latest one we had at the time. That was 1.3%, although this has subsequently increased to 1.8% for January.
Councillor Brunt, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Mayor. To the Director, every year there is a lot of confusion about how so-called earmarked reserves work as opposed to general fund reserves, which are for a rainy day. I'd always thought the easiest way of thinking of earmarked reserves or allocated reserve was as money to save from one year to spend in a future year, and that they are a sensible tool in business-like financial planning. Can you confirm that this is the case in Merton, and reassure me how our reserves are earmarked for particular purposes will reduce over the medium term?
So Appendix 8 in the report, starting on page 315, sets out the use of all our reserves, general and earmarked, revenue and capital. We set out a brief explanation of all the reserves in our final accounts, and ordinarily the use of our total earmarked reserves would reduce over the 4-year period. But as I've explained earlier, we had the unusual situation of the DSG deficit increasing to £66 million over that period, offset by our spending review reserve of £44 million. If you excluded those from our earmarked balances, then they would reduce from £31.3 million to just under £10 million over the life of the MTFS.
Councillor Gould, do you have a question?
Given that the Council declared a cross-party climate emergency in 2019 and committed to working towards becoming carbon neutral borough by 2050 and a carbon neutral council by 2030, which elements of the general budget are set aside to fund this work?
So the Council, in response to its climate emergency, has set up a climate emergency working group which had a meeting last week. So they're working alongside internal teams, technical support and external consultation, the culmination of which we reported back to Cabinet in June, with an action plan which will set out the financial implications of the Council aiming to be carbon neutral by 2030 and the borough by 2050. In the interim, in addition to the revenue costs of the climate change team, there is provision within the capital programme for renewable energy schemes and investor save schemes of £2.5 million to continue the work on reducing carbon emissions from our stock and street lighting.
Councillor Anderson, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do. To the Director. Given that the positive performance of the pension fund over a number of years is one of the reasons we have not needed to take even bigger cuts this year, and has led to us finding an additional £2.4 million a year. Can you provide some reassurance that the fund's resilience, particularly in the light of the recent falls in the stock market due to coronavirus? Thank you.
So the fund actually uses a smoothed value rather than the market value to carry out the calculation, which helps to capture a daily average mover over a period, roughly 3 months either side of the valuation date, and not a specific date, particularly due to the impact a significant short-term rise or fall could have on what they're looking at. So our strategy over the past few years can be seen to be paying off, and the fund rose from a level of 89% in 2013 to 94% in 2016, and has now risen to 103% funding level. So the value of our fund was £718 million, as valued at the date of March 31st, but as we said, that's based over a period either side of 3 months. In December, the fund value rose to £789 million, and since then the experts estimate that the markets have fallen by 12%, which has wiped off, we estimate, £55 million of the value of our holdings. However, we're still above the value of the fund as at the 31st of March date, and above, luckily, our current estimated liabilities of £698 million. The market is also beginning to recover after interest rate cuts in the US, but we recognise it's still very early days, but we will be keeping an eye on this.
Councillor Moulton, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Director, what was the total gross spend of the Council in the audited financial statements for the years 2010-11 and 2017-18? And what is the gross forecast outturn for the full year 2019-20? Thank you.
So for 2010-11 and then 17-18 and 19-20, actual gross expenditure and estimated gross expenditure are 378.8 million, 407.8 million and 546.8 million. The net expenditure for 10-11 and 17-18, an estimated net spend for 19-20, 152.4 million, 137.7 million and 140 million. I think that was the forecast outturn is a favourable variance of 1.7 million as reported in February.
Councillor Kohler, do you have a question?
I do, thank you, Madam Mayor. What was the number of Merton's full FTE employees at both September 2015 and September 2019? And how many union officials funded by the Council were there at each date?
So in September 2015, we had 1,995 employees with 3.54 full-time union equivalents. In September 2019, we had 1,719 employees and 3.54 full-time union representatives. Those numbers do exclude non-teaching staff in schools who are members of unions.
Councillor Macaulay, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks, Director, for your presentation on the business plan 2020-24. Can you outline some of the actions that we have taken over the past few years to encourage a high collection rate for council tax and minimize the need for recourse to bailiffs? Thank you.
So the council has a generous council tax support scheme where many residents do not have to pay any council tax, unlike a lot of other authorities. We promote payment by direct debit and have increased the number of payers by this method by 2% from 2018-19. So we now have 61% of all of our payers on direct debit. We offer e-billing and residents can sign up to our online service, My Tax and Benefits, where they can view bills, apply for discounts, exemptions, and contact us by sending messages directly to their accounts. We've developed a range of e-forms which enables residents moving in and relocating within the borough to advise us electronically, and our software can make automatic updates to close open accounts where applicable. New residents can use this to sign up for direct debits at the time they're registering for council tax, which means they also get the maximum number of instalments to pay over the life of their bill. So we are encouraging residents to give us a mobile telephone contact number, and prior to sending reminder notices, we are able to send SMS messages to those who have missed paying an instalment, and it gives residents an opportunity to pay before any further notices are sent. This has proved to be very popular and has resulted in fewer reminder notices being sent out. So we've had a reduction by 70% of notices in this year compared to last year. And we offer payment by instalments to residents at that stage, which has resulted in less cases being considered for bailiff action. So we've also this year introduced a warning letter to potential cases where they may be passed to enforcement agents in the future, and that warning letter gives residents another opportunity to pay in full or contact us for an arrangement prior for any action by the bailiffs. As a last resort, the debt will be passed to the enforcement team, but even at that stage, payment arrangements can be offered, and if residents engage with the team and the enforcement agent, then that is the best way of actually mitigating the impact. But having an in-house team means we can be more flexible with the arrangements and costs.
Councillor Latif, do you have a question?
I do, Madam Mayor, thank you. Thank you, Madam Director. For the Council's medium-term financial strategy, current financial year 2019 to 2020, what budget gap was identified in February 2018 and January 2019 budget papers, and what is the current forecast outturn for this financial year? And for the MTFS new financial year 2021, what budget gap was forecast in the Council budget papers February to March 2019, and what budget gap is now expected? Thank you.
For the financial year 1920, the budget gap identified in February 2018 was 1.4 million, and in January 2019 it was nil. And the current forecast outturn for this financial year is a favourable variance of 1.7 million. For the financial year 2021, the budget gap identified in March 2019 was 1.1 million, and it is now nil.
Councillor Butler, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Caroline, for you and your team's work. I'm sure you would agree that one of the Council's successes over the past 10 years has been moving to a medium-term financial strategy that enables us to plan ahead for up to 4 years. However, throughout the business plan process, you have talked about an unusually high level of uncertainty, particularly in relation to things like the dedicated schools grant and the fact that we still don't know how much business rates or government grant we might receive from the next year onwards. How far does this limit your ability to plan over a medium term and maximise benefits to the Council?
So I have referred to the one-year funding settlements, delays in the fair funding review and business rates reform, the fact that retention of 75% business rates has not come in, and that's also reduced the effectiveness of the London pool. Clearly the issue around the DSD deficit going forward has had a major impact on our finances over the medium term, and we still have no assurity around the continuation of social care grants. There's also some of the other grants that we have at this moment in time. We're not sure if they're going to continue as well, so the New Homes Bonus and the Troubled Families Grant. We're not sure how the new spending review will take account of demographic growth, and there may be issues around sparsity and density which may have further impacts for London. We also will have the potential cost of complying with the Council's Climate Change Emergency Declaration. So all the above uncertainties make it extremely challenging to realistically plan over the medium term, as there's no certainty the increased funding we got in 2021 will continue. So this issue has been raised with colleagues at MHCLG, as the delays and uncertainties could mean that savings proposals that are put forward and planned, which may not be the best ones necessary, and also the converse risk that there may be short-term notice around savings of required cuts to services to balance the budget if funding is reduced, which may have a higher impact on our services and residents than those services than if they could be planned for.
Councillor Makin, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question has been asked and answered fully by the Director, and therefore I don't have a question. She's talked about climate change already. Thank you.
Yep, we have used up the allotted 20 minutes, so I will move on. Now on to the leaders' speeches. Councillor Alan Brittis, Leader of the Council, you have 10 minutes to move this business plan report and to present your speech on the report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Tonight I report on our sound financial management during a period of continued government austerity. Tonight I present a budget that means money will be made available to invest in services for Merton's families. Tonight I confirm Labour in Merton is avoiding damaging cuts and able to spend more on priority services. And tonight, Madam Mayor, I want to say a big thank you to all our staff. Madam Mayor, Labour Merton is stronger because we do not seek short-term fixes but pursue a medium-term financial strategy. This budget illustrates that however strong the austerity pressures are, we have held to our July principles set out in our 2010 administration. Madam Mayor, you may have noticed that I've just gone back a decade. And that reminds me of our late dear colleague, Councillor Danny Connellan. His name is up there as an honorary freeman. Danny had this ability to provide a history lesson to the chagrin of the opposition benches during budget meetings. David Williams will recall the history lessons. So here goes a history lesson from me, Madam Mayor. In 2010, we started our term of office with a 70 million budget gap. Since then, we have faced further government cuts every year. But we have consistently maintained our top objectives since then, making Merton a great place for families and bridging the gap. So, to the history exam question, Madam Mayor. Describe the achievements of the London Borough of Merton since 2010. The model answer would include the following, Madam Mayor. Since 2010, Merton Council has maintained council tax rebates for low-income households, opened a new library in Collierswood, opened a new leisure centre in Morden, exempted care leavers from paying council tax, provided an extra 4,500 school places, achieved record school results, has the lowest number of households in temporary accommodation in London, froze the council tax for 6 consecutive years. There endeth the lesson, Madam Mayor. In addition to speaking about the past, one must needs talk about the present. And the budget presented before us today will mean nearly 4 million a year extra for children's services, almost 1 million extra for the borough's refuse service, more money to tackle national greying and scourge of fly tipping, around 150,000 a year for emergency planning ahead of Grenfell, and a saving of 2.4 million on the cost of council pensions. Madam Mayor, the budget before us tonight must be balanced. However, the effect of the Tory government's austerity and funding cuts, aided and abetted by their one-time Liberal friends, means that we need an increase of 1.99 on the council tax, plus the government's 2% for the adult social care precept. We also need to find 16 million a year in savings by 2023, with a further gap of 9 million a year after that. It does not end there, Madam Mayor. I have to report to this meeting tonight a shortfall in government funding for the most deserving in our community. Our children with special needs look to us for support. We have set aside a further 37 million for them, but the cost could raise to 65 million. Madam Mayor, I can assure you that we will, despite all the difficulties imposed on us, continue to look to the future for our residents, for our EU residents seeking settled status, for our Windrush residents seeking justice from a dysfunctional Home Office, for our residents wanting the council to support St Helier Hospital, with now 95% of residents on side with our position, for our residents wanting us to enforce against fly tippers, bad landlords, road traders and those engaged in antisocial behaviour, and for our residents looking forward to a new town centre in Morden, a new master plan in Wimbledon, and investment in Collierswood and in Mitcham, and for our residents needing their small corner shop that is helped by Merton Council with automatic rate relief, and for our residents and all AFC fans looking forward to football at Plough Lane this coming August, for our residents in the voluntary sector where funding has increased for the second year in a row, now over 10 million, and for our residents seeking action from us on climate change, following our climate change emergency motion passed unanimously by everyone here, and I want to thank everyone. And Friends of the Earth say we are joint second in London for being climate friendly, Madam Mayor. Residents also want us to take action on air pollution and to improve air quality. And I'm pleased to report that the Local Government Chronicle has shortlisted Merton for our groundbreaking work on construction site pollution. And we've been approached by the Met Office, Madam Mayor, to work with them to develop new approaches to modelling and forecasting air pollution nationally. And we're also, as you know, Madam Mayor, tackling air pollution around schools with our anti-idling campaign. Madam Mayor, we must also look to the future that lies with Merton's children. And for them, our school improvement team continues to work miracles, Madam Mayor. We have good and outstanding schools. We have the opening of a brand new building for our new secondary school in South Wimbledon this September. We have record numbers of parents getting their first preference in their choice of school. And we are third in the country for the progress our school children make. Not third in London, not third in the south of England, but I repeat, third in the country, Madam Mayor. But there also needs to be a future for all in education. Therefore, we do not forget the good marks we have got for adult education from Ofsted, as we aim to provide opportunities for everyone to experience the joy of lifelong learning. Let's not forget Merton's Children's Services, as it continues to look after some of our most vulnerable in our society, and we have kept all children's centres open. Madam Mayor, I now move to formally present Labour's 10th budget in a row. I therefore move the business plan and the budget proposals as set out in Recommendation 1, with particular reference to the form of resolutions as set out in Appendix 1 to the report before us tonight. In doing so, I want to single out a few people for special thanks. Councillor Mark Allison, my Deputy Leader and Finance Member. All councillors who chair and who sit on our scrutiny panels. Thanks go to Councillor Peter Southgate, the Chair of Scrutiny, to all my Cabinet members and to all my councillors, to the Leader of the Opposition, Councillor Nick McLean, and to all his councillors. And I also want to thank Councillor Fairclough and his Liberal colleagues. Finally, a big thank you to you, Director of Corporate Services, Caroline Holland. Thank you very much. Madam Mayor, we always take action for those residents facing difficult times in every budget we have given since 2010. But action for our residents will not happen without our excellent, hard-working staff, and it is to them that I now turn. I want to thank staff in our libraries for their work in installing 7 stunning sensory places for children. We need to thank staff in our elections department for carrying out 3 unscheduled elections. We need to thank staff for Car Free Day, for the Rainbow Crossing, for Phil Merton, and for the record recycling rates we are achieving. We need to thank Dr. Dagmar Zuna, our Director of Public Health, for her guidance on the coronavirus outbreak, guidance that has gone to us, to local MPs, to residents, to businesses, and to council staff, Madam Mayor. Our staff, led by our Chief Executive, Jed Curran, and his directors, are showing great resilience in very challenging times with increasing demand for our services. And they're still producing great results and providing a great service to our residents. But let me share some individual cases and thoughts from residents themselves, Madam Mayor. From adult social care, this is what one person said. The occupational therapy department at Merton have never failed to give exceptional support. The service to date has enabled me to care for my mother-in-law in our home. From libraries, my son loves the new circus-themed West Barnes Library. He asks to visit every day after school. We're planning on doing a tour of all Merton's libraries to see the different themes, equipment and books they all have. From children's and schools and families, I'm right to say a big thank you to you as a social worker who's helped us. You're always there when we need you. Instead of judging me, you have put many things in place to help me through very difficult times. That's real testimony from people, Madam Mayor. I now want to express my pride in the entire workforce for the work they do for our residents and for our community here in the London Borough of Merton. And in conclusion, Madam Mayor, a rare first edition of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was found by an 11-year-old reader in Wimbledon during this financial year. The book is of high value and is being safely kept somewhere in this building. I have, however, Madam Mayor, been making some inquiries as to the book's actual worth, but sadly the value of the book is not so high as to wipe out the cuts we're facing from the government. Perhaps Harry Potter's magic wand may come in useful, but as we know, Madam Mayor, such magic, including magic money trees, are the preserve of Tory Prime Ministers. And to the reality, and to the real world, Madam Mayor, our budget this year is a budget for families, a business-like budget, a budget that bridges the gap, a budget for safety, a budget for equalities. I commend this budget from London's best council, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
The business plan report is being seconded by Councillor Stringer.
I second the report and I would like to reserve my right to speak.
Councillor McLean, Leader of the Opposition, you have 10 minutes to speak.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. May I begin by thanking the officers for their hard work in preparing this budget report. 12 months ago, I delivered my first budget speech. Then I said that I disliked the administration's lazy approach to policy making. If it's working, tax it. If you don't like it, ban it. Well, I still do. But tonight, Madam Mayor, I want to speak about what the Conservatives are determined to champion in Merton. Ambition, technology, and success. Clear blue thinking in how we approach the challenges that confront our communities. The lazy left like to vilify Conservatives and say that we value individualism over family and community, actually over everything. Well, they're wrong. We simply acknowledge the contest that life is. And in doing so, we encourage the inner energy that sets free the ambition that burns so deeply within. Why not? It's part of human nature. Madam Mayor, to govern is to lead, to set clear priorities and objectives with detailed planning and appropriate resources aligned. This Labour-led administration is failing to follow these most simple of practices, and the recent LGA Corporate Peer Challenge report supports this view. That the Council's financial strategy is not explicit about how it supports strategic priorities versus balancing the Council's budget. There is not a clear narrative that describes where the borough has come from and indeed where it is going, resulting in a lack of clarity for staff and planning across the departments, and it isn't clear how resources are aligned behind a common goal. To Merton Labour, being businesslike is just a slogan. To us, it is an ethos. A word of advice to the Labour front bench: just saying it doesn't mean it's done. You have to get it done. Madam Mayor, the commercialisation of the borough's assets must always form a central thread in our strategic thinking. And yes, that means taking risk. How else will we become a truly transformative council? Of course, we should look to mitigate risk, but to de-risk to the point that there is no risk simply removes all financial benefit. Indeed, it is in itself an excuse to do nothing. Reviewing risk appetite to ensure opportunities that can deliver a wider range of benefits are not missed. Let's take the fate of Morden Park House as an example. In last year's budget, the administration proposed to closing it, and now it is turning over a profit. Now, Madam Mayor, officers produced a report on the Liberal Democrats' voluntary mansion tax as required. It was then rejected by Cabinet as the policy was deemed unworkable. If they had researched their policy properly, they would have known the limitations of the original motion. At OSC, they tried to widen its scope, ignoring the democratic decision already laid down by this council. Councillor Pritchard was right when he commented that their leader's performance at the Commission lacked integrity. Well, it's back, and yet again they are not providing the full information. In the narrative, they admit to say that Westminster Council has the lowest council tax in the country. And unable to reband properties from H to HI and J, they look to a voluntary scheme. It was a levelling up measure. To explain, Madam Mayor, the average amount received by Westminster was £2,384. This figure includes its £963 voluntary contribution. The band age charge for Merton residents in 2019 and 20 is £3,096. But tonight, Madam Mayor, we are not voting on the policy, but a consultation, and we would have appreciated the courtesy of including that cost in their amendment. So when Councillor Fairclough stands shortly, perhaps he could confirm how much the consultation will cost, where will it be funded from, and has this been signed off by officers? What are we actually voting on? Madam Mayor, over the last 10 years, difficult decisions have needed to be made by successive Conservative-led governments to restore the public finances. Conservative chancellors have undertaken their historic duty of fixing the public finances after their Labour counterparts have run out of other people's money to spend. They took difficult decisions that have enabled this one nation Conservative government to fund an increase in the core spending power of local government by 6.3% nationally and 6.5% in London. The members across the aisle are going to have to rethink their strategy. No longer will they be able to follow the redundant mantra of anti-austerity rhetoric laid down by Councillor Allison. Their performance at the last council meeting verged on the ridiculous. Member after member standing to speak as if nothing had changed, if there had been no election. Well, there was. The people voted, and they voted Conservative. Madam Mayor, technology is our great hope, so often drowned out by the redundant politics of class warfare, virtue signalling, and the frenzy of climate change. It is technology that will enable us to meet the challenges of the 21st century. The new education technology, such as digital interactive whiteboards, giving the opportunity for all pupils to be challenged by innovative learning techniques. Technology and opportunity. That's conservative thinking. But like two sides of a coin, with opportunity comes challenges, and none more so than artificial intelligence in the workplace. This is a genuine contest, designed to be an evolution to greater productivity. And like all advancements, though, throughout the ages, it will mean change. Change we must embrace and master, because it is technology that will expand our economy and enrich our lives, not the politics of tax and ban. Madam Mayor, much to the concern of members of opposite, we have been campaigning extensively in Mitcham and Morden, meeting residents and discussing their concerns. And we are witnessing firsthand the disgraceful conditions of their streets. It infuriates me and my Conservative colleagues when we see the residents in these wards being failed by the very people they have elected to represent them on this council. The management of the Viola contract has been a disgrace, which has now led to the renegotiation and further costs to Merton residents. Where is the political determination to sort this mess out? And that includes fly tipping too. I acknowledge the challenge, but we simply must be more proactive in our approach. And that is why we are proposing to double the council's enforcement capabilities, and in doing so, giving hope to Merton residents. Because that is what is required. Politicians taking the lead, setting high standards, and demanding results. Madam Mayor, how we deliver our health provision has changed. It is 2020, not 1920. Clinical outcome must be the overriding consideration, and that means the right care at the right place at the right time. For 20 years, the Merton Labour Party have impeded investment in St Helier Hospital, and now the buildings are no longer fit for purpose.
Shame on Labour.
To those in this chamber that are already talking judicial review, I say that if we do not seize this opportunity, there may not be another. The very thing you are trying to stop, you may well end up causing. You are not part of the solution. I urge you to look to the Nelson Hospital, to the Rains Park Medical Centre, to see what can be achieved when you remove the politics. Because it is the party of the NHS, the Conservative Party, that will provide the funding for the sustainable long-term future for St Helier Hospital. Madam Mayor, there are great challenges ahead, and to compete we need vision, courage and energy. But just 4 weeks ago in this chamber, I gave the Leader of the Council the opportunity to look to the future. Instead, egged on by Councillor Allison, he chose to reheat the redundant arguments of the past, now settled. In doing so, they confirmed what most members on this council already know, and indeed I suspect they do too, that they represent the past and not the future. So, Madam Mayor, I urge members to vote for our amendment, and in doing so, demanding change. Thank you.
Well done.
Councillor Fairclough, Leader of the Liberal Democrat Group, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'd also like to thank officers for their work on the budget. Now, we all know that the government is to blame for the continuing cuts to local government services, and so far it's failed to do anything like reverse the spending cuts of the last decade. Despite talking of vision, courage and energy, and not really displaying any, there's no mention of that, Madam Mayor, from the Conservative group. Their amendment at least aims to reflect some priorities, albeit not ones often associated with our Conservative colleagues, but it just simply drains down the reserves. What about the longer term? It's funny that he should speak of lack of integrity and virtue signalling, because that's what their amendment displays. No thought has been given as to how these priorities could really be sustained by the administration over time. Now, in 2018, the Conservative group ran on a manifesto of making things a little bit better, and their amendment fails even this limited threshold. It's a politician's amendment, written to look good on a leaflet, written to be voted down. Like I said last year, we demand more and we demand better of the official opposition. Nonetheless, the administration bears responsibility for the choices it makes in this budget. We know that Merton's weaknesses is lack of follow-through, taking measured risks and setting targets, measuring performance, telling a story about the council and what it's trying to achieve. Now, during the last year, LGA peer review, councillors and officers from other councils highlighted these gaps. And it echoes that this administration didn't put forward a manifesto at the last local elections. It's about political leadership. Merton needs to listen, be bold, creative, take responsibility for its actions. Instead, we get the scrutiny process, hundreds of pages to wade through to understand what's being done. But this gives us no sense of what the point of the administration is and what they stand for. What we get told from both the opposition and the administration is that the council should be businesslike. Madam Mayor, whether we believe it's true or not, Does that inspire anyone? Is it what we came into politics for? Does business-like explain what you're trying to do, what services you want to protect, and what you want to transform? Many of the challenges we face, the climate emergency, the funding crisis, racism and intolerance in our communities need people to come together to take action. And as a council, we must do what we can to create the best environment to help our communities come together. But if you're not paid enough, if you don't get enough hours, if your housing is insecure or badly maintained, if you don't get the support you need as a carer or parent, then some days things just take way too much energy. You have fewer choices, no peace, you're not free to live how you choose. So we're challenging the administration to look at ways to help give people more support, give them more room to breathe, more control in their lives and more opportunities to increase and develop their stake in our area. Madam Mayor, tonight we're bringing forward 3 amendments that we think will help bring a fresh start. We're not going to fall into the same trap as the Conservatives. We recognise the need for evidence before big changes can be made, but we also know that change needs to be sustainable. On our Amendment 1, which Councillor McLean spent so much time talking about, primary school breakfast clubs bring many advantages. The evidence shows extra opportunities for socialising, varied food, less hunger, and so better concentration, plus some safe and reliable childcare for working parents. So this amendment establishes a limited pilot scheme to properly understand how we might develop a sustainable scheme for children from the lowest income families. We know that the overall financial position doesn't offer much room for unpicking the cuts, but with our Amendment 2, we're hoping the administration will think again about some of the things proposed. Charging applicants for blue badges, not replacing youth worker vacancies and cutting training in safeguarding, expecting the procurement team to negotiate contracts better to make millions of savings at the same time as cutting staff. These are not things we should be quick to do. And yes, to help pay for this, we've had to make some difficult choices. Cutting my Merton and reducing the number of full-time trade union staff, and using available reserves to help ballast the budget until the position becomes clearer. Now, as a former trade union rep in the private sector, I completely understand the positive role of a trade union. But as the number of Merton staffs has fallen in the last 5 years, reducing paid-for facilities time is not unreasonable. Lastly, Amendment 3 is about setting a new course for the Council, giving people that peace and space to feel more involved in their community. But we recognise that change doesn't come quickly or easily, so this amendment presents a series of actions to help build the evidence base for change, to help us understand how best to do it. That's looking at how paying the London living wage will impact on contracts and workers, and how to make things better for those on zero hours, or helping renters by the application for a full landlord licensing scheme. And if we take climate change seriously, we need to identify money to help make the borough net carbon neutral. Madam Mayor, we urge colleagues to give these ideas a fair hearing. Merton's officers, as the opposition well know, have worked with us to ensure they are...
Councillor Southgate, leader of the Merton Park Ward Independent Residents, you have 3 minutes.
As I know only too well, Madam Mayor, I'll try and use those 3 minutes to cover a subject as complex as Merton's budget. I'm going to do this from the perspective of the budget scrutiny process, which this year was more about the big picture, I think, than the detailed savings. In fact, all of the savings were accepted. In some respects, we got a better settlement than we might have expected from central government, including over 5 million from the revenue support grant, which we hadn't seen for several years, and the Improved Better Care Fund increased to nearly 5 million. But these grants are for 1 year only. We have no certainty that they will continue. And so far as our medium-term financial strategy through to 22-23 is concerned, there are several known unknowns. The biggest of these by far is the deficit on the direct schools grant and how it may eventually be resolved by the DfE. Adding last year's overspend of 2.9 million to this year's forecast overspend of 10.5 million gives us a cumulative deficit of 13.4 million. It's set to go on rising. So it's prudent to make provision for this, and you will see that 16 million has been set aside, even if the DfE expressly forbids us from funding the deficit directly. Now, if the deficit can be resolved, and there are some grounds for cautious optimism, the effect on our finances could be transformative, and that's no exaggeration. I know you shouldn't count your chickens before they're hatched, But if this happens, I would urge Cabinet to revisit some of the most difficult savings we've scrutinised, those classed as high risk and with the most impact on vulnerable users. And I'll give you an example. A reduction of 100,000 on the 700,000 budget for children's social care comes with, and I quote, the risk of less effective or reduced resource available to respond to serious youth violence and exploitation of Merton children. Look a bit further into the Equalities Impact Assessment. The language gets even more stark. This may result in increased numbers of young people being seriously injured or killed, and an increase in the number of young people who need to become looked after to increase their safety. So it's reassuring that this saving is to be reviewed before it's taken. I, for one, hope that it is never taken. We all know that youth violence is on the increase in Merton, as elsewhere in London. This is not the time to be cutting back on activities to counter it. Madam Mayor, I just notice I have 20 seconds left, which is time to remind you all of the scrutiny questionnaire. And I'm filling in as I speak, and do please make sure you've all done it before the end. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I will now invite members of the Cabinet to comment on the report. Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Over the years, we have talked a lot about being businesslike, instilling financial discipline, budgeting over 4 years rather than just one, making tough decisions and taking reasonable risks early, planning ahead. But we are businesslike for a purpose. The opposition seems confused, but here in Merton, being businesslike means, instead of the closures seen elsewhere, a new leisure centre, a new library, and, opening in September, a new secondary school. It means our amazing staff have the tools they need to, for instance, transform our children's services into one of only a few in the country to be rated good and outstanding. It means our secondary schools have had the support they need to rise to be in the top 3 in the whole country. And if we approve the business plan tonight, it means we'll be able to boost these services to children by an extra £5 million. And being businesslike means investing in our staff who are doing such a good job even in spite of austerity. Now, I see there's a Liberal Democrat motion tonight to cut our staff's facilities, and I have to say that is not businesslike. It would be a false economy and could be very damaging. And I also see that they've rehashed plans for a donation scheme that even the cross-party scrutiny commission agreed would cost more to run than it would to rise. Except this time, their business case is based on the crazy expectation that shift workers living in Band D flats in Mitcham should pay as much as millionaires in Band H mansions in Belgravia. Now, it's pretty clear from that the Lib Dems don't understand businesslike. They keep talking about a fresh start, but Madam Mayor, what we really need is a fresh start for Merton's Lib Dems. Being businesslike also means having a stable and well-run pension fund, and ours has performed better than most councils for several years. And as a result, tonight we can put £2.4 million that would have gone to the fund into services instead. Thanks to business-like management like that, we can put nearly £1 million more into our refuse service, in part to tackle the national scourge of fly tipping, a national scandal the government needs to sort out. And we can continue to be one of the few councils in the country to still provide full council tax support, helping low-paid families who need it the most. But since 2010, the government has been anything but businesslike. Councils across the country have been forced to make cuts on an unprecedented scale, and far from the Tories' claim that there is increasing levels of funding, even in this business plan, we've still had to include £16 million of savings to balance the books. Tonight, the Conservatives are calling for more realistic forecasting, but that's rich, coming from the same people whose government have left us having to find, well, anywhere between £5 million and £65 million because of their underfunding of special needs education. I am proud of what we have done of what we have been able to achieve in competent, moderate Labour Merton. Our resident survey shows that thanks to our business-like approach, satisfaction with the council is consistently 10% higher than the national average. Great schools, great parks, great libraries, a great place for families. We are business-like for a purpose. Now the government should be too.
Councillor Atwar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Since becoming a councillor for the last decade, every year has been challenging when setting the budget because of austerity and the cuts in grant funding from central government. But this year has been particularly so, not knowing what grant funding local authorities would receive from central government, along with the uncertainty of a potentially no-deal Brexit and even a general election. Who knew that crystal gazing was a prerequisite to becoming a councillor? So with the uncertainty of what to expect in the way of funding, there has never been a greater need to ensure the vulnerable are protected. The main reason we are all here as local representatives is to try to improve the lives of those who rely on us, and that is why my job as Cabinet Member for Equalities is so important to do just that, improve their lives. Equality impact assessments are a very key part of a business-like budget that is focused on improving people's lives. They are one of the key tools when making important decisions during the budget setting process. Equality impact assessments ensures we look closely at the way we deliver key services to identify leaner, smarter ways of working. As so much of the Council's work helps vulnerable people, any savings are bound to disproportionately affect them more than others. However, our equality impact assessments mean that we can analyse and establish ways of mitigating them to ensure the least impact on the most affected, whilst at the same time delivering a balanced budget. We have had to make some difficult choices, but there are also examples where going through the discipline of the equality impact assessment process shows we can also improve opportunities. For instance, we have been able to show that some of our work on adult social care could improve and promote independence for our vulnerable residents, whilst also making savings. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the officers and scrutiny panels for the work they have done, enabling us to deliver a balanced budget tonight.
We will now take the amendments in turn. Councillor McLean, please will you formally move the Conservative budget amendment?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
The amendment seconder is Councillor Gretton.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I'm pleased to see Councillor Allison being a little bit less pessimistic and perhaps a little bit less lugubrious than his former self. He spent the last couple of years talking only about austerity, but now he's seen in the financial year 18 to 19 an underspend and a surplus funding of £11 million in the council's budget, and millions of pounds extra this year. It seems there's going to be yet another surplus. And as Councillor McLean, our leader of our group, has just stated, in going into the new financial year, there's a whopping big 6.5% in core spending when you add up all the different government grants and the taxes raised by the borough. That's a massive, massive increment going into the new financial year of funds flowing into the council budget, Madam Mayor. And I'm delighted. And I hope Councillor Allison, as a financial leader for Merton, picks up some of that optimism. I don't want him to continue being the chief doomster and gloomster of Merton, which he often is in the council meetings as he's poring over some of the most pessimistic forecasts. I think only just over a year ago I saw one of those forecasts for the current financial year we're going into being stated at over £15 million, which has now magically disappeared somehow. But there's often a very pessimistic story to tell. I just heard them referring to the special needs block funding, Madam Mayor, and what a dire state that factors in. But actually, if only Councillor Allison were to check his bank account for the borough, you'll see that the higher needs funding was £31.5 million a couple of years ago, and it's already at £40 million today, Madam Mayor, going into the new financial year, and it's going to increase to £43 million 21-22, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, we're tabling 4 fantastic, exciting budget amendments for the residents of Merton, and I hope everybody can get really, really excited behind them. They're very, very positive amendments. The first is for a new crack enforcement unit, fly tipping enforcement unit. Every ward has its hotspots. We're going to resolve fly tipping for a £100,000 fund, which will cover the cost of a brand new enforcement unit, visiting the hotspots daily basis, levying fines under the statutory EPA process. And I never want to hear that a councillor in this borough complains that there's a lack of resources for enforcement. We found £100,000. Here it is, doubling the size of the enforcement unit for fly tipping. I know you're all interested in that in your boroughs, having visited so many of them recently, and I can tell you you're desperately in need of this. It would be great news for residents in your own boroughs, in your own wards. Secondly, the Living Walls Fund. You may have seen at the Oval Cricket Ground, Madam Mayor, the wonderful, big, magnificent living walls. We've got a £100,000 fund, Madam Mayor, to build half a dozen or more living walls, which are fantastic message for climate change, for a greener London, for air quality. We could put one up, for example, Councillor Benbow's suggestion, covering the tube station in South Wimbledon, possibly one at the crossroads at Plough Lane, Madam Mayor, one in the middle of Collier's Wood Plaza, one in Mitcham Town Centre. We're offering a £100,000 fund to build 6 magnificent green living walls across the borough. That's just fantastic news on air quality for our residents, Madam Mayor. The other thing, Madam Mayor, offering is a £100,000 fund. We want to get interactive electronic whiteboards into every single school in Merton. Primary schools, additional needs schools, sixth form colleges and secondary. That's just going to be fantastic news. It's innovation, it's technology, it's helping the burden on teachers, and it's stretching the learning and development of our pupils in our schools. An interactive whiteboard fund of £100,000. And lastly, Madam Mayor, we've got a fantastic fund for the underutilised expenditure in the new financial year to set up electric bike schemes, cycling infrastructure and new segregated cycling lanes across our borough, through our town centres and linking our town centres. We've got a fund there, proposal. Please vote for it. It's going to introduce cycling in our borough. It's just going to be... These are very, very positive amendments, Madam Mayor. We have an opportunity to use funding like that to close the link on the Wandle Trail into Merton. These are very, very positive, green, positive amendments for the future of our borough, and I urge every councillor in our chamber to vote in favour of these amendments. Thank you very much.
Councillor Fairclough, please will you formally move the Liberal Democrat Budget Amendment 1?
Formally moved, Madam Mayor.
The amendment seconder is Councillor Bailey.
I formally second, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Fairclough, please will you formally move the Liberal Democrat Budget Amendment 2?
Once again, formally move the amendment.
The amendment seconder is Councillor Bailey.
Formally seconded, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Fairclough, please will you formally move the Liberal Democrat Budget Amendment 3?
No surprise, but formally moved, Madam Mayor.
The amendment seconder is Councillor Bailey.
Formally seconded, Madam Mayor.
I will now open up the floor to members for the main debate. Firstly, Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At budget time, we often hear much of the term business-like, and it's often accompanied by some derisory scoffing from the opposition seats. So I thought I'd take a couple of minutes to say what that term means to me. And I apologise in advance for the slightly technocratic and rather dull nature of what I'm about to say. But as most of you know, I am the chair of the Pensions Advisory Panel, and it is just that, an advisory panel with all the hard yards and many of the tough decisions taken by the officers and leaders of this council. Not over months, but over years, and always with a long-term business-like strategy in mind. For example, under the old investment strategy, 85% of our investments were in equity and 15% in bonds and property. This imbalance left us hugely exposed to market fluctuations and the kind of slump that we're seeing coronavirus cause. This overexposure was identified by this administration, and the decision was made to transition to a more balanced, well-diversified investment strategy, a transition that is now 99% complete. If those decisions had not been made and the hard work of transitioning not been done, we would be in a different position this week, i.e. not seeing coronavirus slump as something to be ridden through, but something that puts our entire pension strategy at risk. But this strategic transition is not the only piece of work that this council has done. We have simultaneously transitioned 55% of our investments to the London Collective Investment Vehicle, so achieving economies of scale, greater bargaining strength, and ultimately saving our residents money, all whilst also embracing more ethical, environmental, social and governance standards. Just last year, we carried out a complex analysis to establish a new strategy that doesn't just consider the drilling and mining of fossil fuels, but the entire carbon footprint of our investments. This, coupled with the fact that we currently invest 25% of our fund in sustainable low-carbon funds and or renewable energy, means that we have the information needed to further reduce our carbon footprint, but in a way that doesn't adversely affect the 14,000 people who rely on the pension fund or the 200,000 residents who contribute to it. But when all is said and done, one question always remains: what does this mean for our bottom line? Well, last year our fund was valued at 103% of what the auditors assessed we needed to cover our long-term liabilities. This valuation and the work that led up to it has produced a saving of 7.6 million to the general fund over the next 3 years. Money that can be spent on key services and vulnerable people, and mitigating the cuts the government continues to impose. Madam Mayor, unglamorous though it is, this is what the term business-like means to me. Getting things done, prudence with a purpose.
Councillor Holden.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My focus for the budget tonight is the environment, and I will highlight a few examples of what I think this council should be doing with its budget on this topic. Over this last year, along with many other councils across the UK, this council has declared a climate emergency and set about creating an action plan, which I'm on the working group, to help reduce our impact on the climate and to reach the net zero target. We eco-Tories want to conserve and protect the environment, and our Conservative government is proud to be hosting the UN's Climate Change Conference of Parties, otherwise known as COP26, in Glasgow this year. Therefore, both locally and nationally, there are actions taking place, which brings me to the budget. Our group is suggesting an amendment to invest in more trees, in new technologies such as the city trees idea, in positive measures to encourage active travel, cleaner streets and cleaner air. My group firmly believes in innovative technology, unlike this Labour group here, who only seek tax and ban. For example, we would invest and promote an e-bike hire scheme and a residential bike hanger scheme to enable residents to feel more confident and able to cycle around Merton and feel more confident that their bikes will not be stolen. Whereas this Labour group only want to tax residents into subservience, though only if they happen to live in Wimbledon. As I've said often before in scrutiny and in this place, we should offer incentives, carrots if you will, and bring the people with us. I challenge you all to adopt a positive approach and be more like our Conservative Wandsworth Councillor Louise Calland, who has championed these bike hanger schemes in Wandsworth. Another negative is this Labour's council's slowness in implementing their anti-idling action programme outside key pollution hotspots, such as schools and taxi ranks. The public wants strong action here to help protect children's health and to clean up our air, as demonstrated this week by a mother protesting outside Singlegate Primary School in Colliers Wood. I've seen the videos on Facebook. Perhaps technology will help here too. The city trees idea, which Councillor Crowe will describe more, but in essence, each one of these removes as much pollution as 25 ordinary trees. I encourage you to adopt this, like in Labour-controlled Waltham Forest Council. Madam Mayor, we think the council budget should be used to make Merton a cleaner, greener, healthier and more innovative place to live, work and play.
Councillor Akajinia.
Madam Mayor, Merton is a great place for families. I know that because I've lived in my house in Merton for 37 years. And our greatest and most serious responsibility is the borough's children and young people. We all know that when children are well looked after, well educated and well cared for, they thrive. But this responsibility is tested year after year as this heartless Tory government continue to strip councils to their core. And in this challenging environment, we must continue to provide services that are safe. We want to keep Merton a great place for young people to grow up, building resilient communities by bridging the gap and reducing inequalities. We also want Merton to be the best it can for the local environment, safeguarding it for future generations. We must deliver services that children and young people and families want and need and involve them in specification and design. But let's speak honestly, Madam Mayor. Most people here know that services for children with special needs and disabilities are my passion, as I had a young daughter who had a disability before she passed away. It is scandalous that the government does not fund services here like the DSG as they should. And I was quite surprised that the opposition on the other side never mentioned anything about funding for DSE. They're all interested in doing things to do with computers and technology, while we've got issues in this borough to do with our children's services, special needs and disabilities. Only changes in national policies can turn the tide, because factors such as raising children's poverty and deprivations are overwhelming. It isn't easy and we are not complacent, but as we go forward, we will put our users at the heart of our services. Our vision is to build a Merton that is a great place to grow up, regardless of where you come from. And that is why I'm supporting this budget tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Ormerod.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Technology is often associated with increased automation and reduced human interaction. And within the education sector, it will never replace the role of our great teachers. However, technology can be an effective tool to help reduce workload, increase efficiencies, engage students, and provide tools to support excellent teaching and raise student attainment. We have a long-standing history of innovation in this country, and we are living in a digitally enabled world where technology is increasingly part of our society. We owe it to our young people to do more, to explore and reap the benefits that technology can bring. Therefore, what we are asking for today is for the Council to remove monies from reserves and invest in technology in our borough's schools. We today are making the recommendation for every school to be given an electronic whiteboard. Our ambition is for there to be at least one whiteboard in every school across the borough, and where schools already have this facility, we would hope to increase the number in their schools with the eventual aim to have one in all classrooms across the borough. We believe that the Council need to think ambitiously rather than continue with this constant stalemate narrative. Ambition here is key. The future of children in Merton is key. Need to act now. That's act, not debate, act and equip Merton's children for the future.
Councillor Bakari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It will come as no surprise that I've been really keen to talk about Amendment 1, ensuring that every child has the best possible start in life, regardless of their background. It's why I got involved with politics in the first place. And as a teacher, my colleagues and I were thrilled when the Lib Dems in government introduced Pupil Premium to give schools the funding to support underprivileged children. And I remember being so relieved that finally, when the Lib Dems were in government, there were policies that cared about the poorest children, ensuring there were free school lunches in Key Stage 1. This was a time when I was bringing in sandwiches and fruit to feed some of the children, and trust me, I know how hard it is to teach hungry children. This is why I had to fight for more and will continue to do so for our most needy children. Amendment 1 builds on the good work that Lib Dems have done with Pupil Premium and free school meals. Our proposal is about giving our most vulnerable children access to free breakfast clubs, but on a pilot basis. Any primary school teacher can tell you who has had a good breakfast in the morning and who has not. Research commissioned by the Department of Education found clear benefits of children's mental well-being as well as increased progress in learning. But you don't need lots of research to prove this. We all know a good breakfast is a good way to start a day. But there are many parents right now who are struggling to put food on their table. It's an increasing number. Our Breakfast Club's proposal is the embodiment of a fresh start. A fresh start for every morning for every child, no matter who they are. A fresh start for our vulnerable parents who need extra support at home. A fresh start for our schools who want to focus on every child's learning and not on empty tummies. It is clear and sad that the Tory amendment has no understanding again of the reality of most parents in schools right now, when schools are actually asking parents for money to pay for pencils and glue sticks. Interactive whiteboards are not a priority right now, and every class has one, by the way. And teachers cannot teach or help children who are hungry. Our most vulnerable children are suffering right now under this government. So our council must act now to help our most deprived children, and they must act now.
Thank you. Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's the 10th year Labour's Merton Council has tabled a balanced budget, a budget that plans for known risks such as volatile financial markets, a Conservative government whose priority is not to invest in local services. It also plans for unknown risks of Brexit, coronavirus and other future threats to life and property, all while residents rightly are expecting more from our services. Nationally, the challenge before local government is daunting. We know that the financial settlement by the Conservative government is not enough to fund the services people hold dear. Statistical analysis by the House of Commons Library of this year's settlement shows that funding levels are effectively flat in real terms compared to 2019 and 20. And this leaves most authorities well below the level of funding that they will have received in 2015-16. If we look at our own borough, we're receiving less money than we did a decade ago from central government, and that's less on recycling, less tackling fly tipping and less supporting children's services. When the parties opposite knock on doors, touting their candidates for the mayoral election, I hope they have a good answer for our residents which explains why successive Lib Dem and Conservative governments do not see fit to invest in their parks, playgrounds, tennis courts, libraries, waste services and of course social care. Very recently, our own Labour mayor visited our borough and met residents in South Wimbledon. They made it clear to Sadiq Khan is their candidate and there is their man who stand up for them in City Hall against the lack of central government action on the issues that matter to them. Madam Mayor, the 900 plus pages produced for tonight's 10th Labour balanced budget is a work of hundreds of hours of officer time and a scrutiny process, but it also represents something deeper, a longer term commitment to residents of the borough through our medium term financial planning and by the political choices of this administration and the leadership on these front benches. As Councillor McLean has stated a few moments ago, to lead is to choose, and on this side of the chamber, we have chosen by providing council tax relief for the most vulnerable, by taking in 50 child refugees and 2 Dubs children, by declaring a climate emergency, providing opportunity for all ages by keeping libraries open and opening a new library, by tackling air pollution in partnership with the Met Office, by working to support equitable access to local hospital services, by prosecuting landlords and supporting tenants, increasing funding for voluntary sectors, achieving record recycling rates, supporting schools to enable our youngest residents to succeed and take on the world. And we built a new leisure centre in Morden, enjoyed by my families, but enjoyed by families like my own, and across Merton and also from neighbouring Sutton, especially the purpose-built diving pool. To do all this and to continue to be a great place to live for families, we have balanced the books through a strong financial plan, acting in a business-like way, and investing in both people and assets for the long term. In closing, I welcome this budget. Thank you very much.
Councillor Simpson.
Madam Mayor, I'm delighted to speak in support of the amendment proposed by our new British citizen, Councillor McLean. As he said, this amendment is all about hope for the future, better technological education opportunities for the young with new interactive whiteboards, green walls to further enhance our capabilities to combat climate change and pollution, and then a really practical way of seeking to improve the lives of residents by what they see around them by appointing 2 additional enforcement officers to help combat fly tipping. Veolia are still not getting it right. 1,277 recorded incidents of fly tipping against a target of no more than 700 in January alone. Trends have continued to rise over 2019 and 20. And whilst the Labour administration says they're conducting a review and will increase resources to Veolia, we're offering immediate action. Even their own Labour MP, Siobhan McDonough, says that conditions are inexcusable and a disgrace. Madam Mayor, fly tipping is one of the great visible blots on the landscape for many Merton residents, so we're offering with this amendment hope by doubling the number of enforcement officers in the borough. You see, this administration only kicks into life just once a year on National Keep Britain Tidy Day and basically pays lip service to a scandalous problem. In the past, they tried to make out this is Tory government fault because of the non-statutory services cuts that Merton residents pay for their political antics by not having their streets cleaned properly and fly tips removed immediately. This year, members will be invited to don high-vis jackets on the 28th of March, when officers will lead a campaign for just 2 hours to clean up the Wandle Park in Collier's Wood. We want to give hope to residents in the worst affected areas, and that is giving them a dedicated hotline and not simply log an incident. It is a disgrace that in the last 12 months there have only been 3 wards, Village, Dundonald, Lower Morden, where there have been no...
Councillor Draper.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I have a confession to start with. I've never really enjoyed full council, even though I chaired it for a year, because this kind of set-piece stuff just doesn't do it for me. Frankly, like all my colleagues on this side, I prefer getting the job done, in cabinet, in committee, in scrutiny, where it matters, sensibly, relatively quietly. And one of the many things that I'm personally proud of is my involvement in the Regulatory Services Partnership. We knew that as a small borough, a shared service would suit us better, so alongside past Councillor Judy Saunders, I helped oversee starting it with Richmond Council. And under the guidance of our excellent officers, we saw it going from strength to strength until Wandsworth, Mrs Thatcher's favourite borough, and nearly twice our size, asked if they could join us, with Merton still in charge. And we do well on it. Apart from anything else, we're now London's leading air quality monitoring service, with more to come, as the leader outlined. And what's more, crucially, in doing all that, we're saving money, not just for Merton, but for all 3 boroughs, 1 Lib Dem, 1 Tory and 1 Labour. Part of the service is licensing, which I now chair, and which is helping to improve Merton's nighttime economy, to bring prosperity and jobs to Merton, part of creating a great borough to live and to work in. So, Madam Mayor, you don't have to be Labour to do all that, though I believe it helps, but you do need to have Labour values to spend money when, and only when, it's needed. Like, for instance, when we decided to subsidise council tax for our poorest residents when the Tory government left them in the lurch, a move that the party opposite has consistently opposed since 2013. Madam Mayor, that may be the first time that I've mentioned that in this chamber, but I'm always really proud of it. And I keep that value with me when I work for our residents and when I represent our borough. Now that, Madam Mayor, that is satisfying. And that's the bit that I enjoy. I'm proud of what this business-like Labour borough achieves, and I'm proud to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Councillor Bembo.
Right. Thank you, Madam Mayor. That lesson must be learned from the recent guesswork as some worded. This is one of the most polluted junction in Merton in one of the oldest intersections in London. The Labour have failed to tackle the pollution and traffic problems over the years. The lack of signage and showing the safety of the public. These roadworks have caused misery. Madam Mayor, this administration claims to care about tackling pollution and agreed on a motion back in 2017 to work with the Woodland community. They have done nothing. How will they tackle pollution, congestion, and improve the safety of the Woodland junction while they have secured heavily polluted spot nearby for the new Harris School, which is being built and due to be opened in September. Where are the safety measures in place for the school children? Teenagers are about to take chances running across dangerous roads. Yes, this administration will blame on RT ever, but they have months to lobby with them. So far, I've seen nothing, not even a public conversation, but more planning applications approved against our own wishes. Local business are now being affected by increased car parking charges. Should I dare to mention about fly tipping? Where are the promised enforcement officers? Why are they using the budget to maintain the Wimbledon area? We remember they were happy to give away our Merchant Hall and wasted over 4 million of our public money. Shame on you, Labour. Some Wimbledon needs to be a thriving community again. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Quilliam.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you to my colleagues as well for largely dealing with the dribble that's in the Conservative amendments. I don't have to talk about that. And I can focus on our proposals. I'll speak mainly to our Amendment 2, which includes proposals that I think are both modest and will have a genuine positive impact on residents of this borough. Scrapping charges for people applying for blue badges that were only introduced last year would cost the council just £15,000. It's both an affordable proposal and one that will take out needless additional costs for disabled people who would need a car to get around and all too often already face a whole range of extra hidden costs in their everyday lives in any case. Retaining youth workers is again affordable, and with rising youth violence across London, the strains put on these services and those who rely on them, this has to be something that remains a priority for all of us. investing in safeguarding training for council employees is a basic necessity as far as I'm concerned. I can't see any reason why this should be cut, and while I have a suspicion that this amendment won't pass, I would encourage the Cabinet member to revisit this saving regardless. Effective procurement's been an issue here since before I was elected. Let's not make a false economy by cutting another procurement officer that can help ensure we get better value for money for residents. Meanwhile, scrapping My Merton, it'll not only save $44,000 a year, but it'll incentivise the council to look at better ways to communicate. It's too easy to think an article in there ticks the box of letting residents know about a consultation or event, or that maybe over time they might absorb the sheer wonder of this Labour council, when in reality 99% of them just don't read it. So we recognise the constraints on this budget, but let's make it better together. I encourage you to accept our amendments. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper Marbella.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This budget is this administration's 10th, and all of them have been very challenging due to this Tory government austerity measures. As an accountant, I fully understand and appreciate the enormity of the tasks the Finance Department undertake year on year under the directorship of Caroline Holland and, of course, our Cabinet Member for Finance, Councillor Allison. The business-like approach through forward planning and budgeting makes my job as Cabinet Member for Commerce, Leisure and Culture a little bit easier. You see, despite the austerity measures, we as an administration are still striving to provide the services our residents deserve. Our newly built state-of-the-art leisure center in Morden ensures that more residents are taking part in leisure and sporting activities. Madam Mayor, our libraries are thriving. Whilst libraries up and down this country were closing due to lack of funding, we kept all of our libraries opened and rebuilt the Colliers Wood Library into one that is fit for purpose and loved by the community. That has proven to be a great strategy because libraries in Merton are now different to what it is traditionally known for. In addition to having books, we are now the hub of our communities and venue for many activities and projects. A few months ago, you and I attended the launch of Project Sense, an Art Council-funded project which has transformed all of our children's libraries, with emphasis on children with special educational needs. We have expanded our cultural offering through the development of Merton Art Spaces in both Mitcham and Wimbledon libraries. These are spaces from where a wide range of cultural events across different artistic disciplines can be delivered. These are just two of many different ways our libraries are being used. On a yearly basis, we check and we know that residents are very pleased with what we are offering. Our latest customer survey shows that 100% of respondents were satisfied with the current opening hours. 95% rated the service overall as very good or good, and 96% said they would recommend the service to someone else. I'm not surprised of this because last year, the number of people accessing our services by borrowing items or using our self-service terminals increased from 65,000 to over 71,500. Madam Mayor, last year, we had a staggering 1.1 million visits in our libraries. These achievements are astounding, and I want to thank our library staff and particularly our volunteers. Madam Mayor, all of this shows that with all the financial difficulties, this administration continues to work to make Merton a great place for families, and that is why I'm supporting this budget. Thanks.
Councillor Holmes.
Madam Mayor, thank you very much. So, Madam Mayor, my favourite part of being a councillor is the work that I've been involved in with many others on innovation and policies. And a few weeks ago, I met with a cross-party group of councillors. We met together with Sevenoaks Council, and we heard that some of the measures that they're taking for commercialisation and innovation. And a few years ago, I met with another cross-party group of councillors with Peterborough Council, and we heard from them about measures they're taking for commercialisation and innovation. And I'd like to share with the Council tonight 4 items that came out of those 2 meetings. The first is those councils, one or both of them, are looking at increased office accommodation, actually borrowing from the government, building office accommodation, bringing in anchor tenants and unleashing a huge amount of spending locally in their area. Secondly, borrowing to generate income, being business-like, as we talk about here. Thirdly, services under the council's own logo. Maybe services that used to be delivered by a council are appropriate for a council but are no longer delivered by a council. And fourthly, ESCO, a power company, being able to deliver power to the local community. Well, Madam Mayor, those all sound like good ideas, potentially, in the current times that we live in. But I'd like to share with members this evening, particularly those that don't know, that all 4 of those items have been through our scrutiny panels, the scrutiny panels that Councillor Draper says are so important. They've been through scrutiny, they've been adopted by Cabinet, and they have not been implemented. So we hear tonight from Councillor Allison about how businesslike the council are and the tough decisions the council take. Well, in fact, no decisions have been taken on these. They've been adopted, approved by the Cabinet, but nothing's happened. We hear from the council leader this evening that he's looking for Harry Potter books to see if he can sell those to raise money for the council. But, Madam Mayor, I feel what residents would prefer is that the council leader actually implemented the policies it already agreed to, rather than looking for Harry Potter books. Thank you.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, I want to thank Councillor Holden for raising what he's seen on social media about the recent protests at Singlegate School in Collier's Wood that I represent. I think if Councillor Holden and his colleagues were to visit Collier's Wood more often and know the community of Collier's Wood better, they would know that I met with the resident leading those protests at the end of last week and discussed her issues and then took it to the people who can do something about it. Councillor Welton, the Cabinet member with responsibility for that area. I spoke to Leonie Cooper, our London Assembly member, who took that to Sadiq Karnal and the Mayor's office. And the upshot of that is just this afternoon, I presume Councillor Holden has not been looking at his social media this afternoon, the parent in question says, and I quote, "Amazing news, just got an email from Merton Council that TfL yesterday have sent approval to the council to erect the signs for the school safety zone. Heavy traffic will be a thing of the past in South Gardens." That is businesslike. That is getting things done for our residents. But this is the budget meeting, and we're talking about the budget. In effect, local government across the country, including Merton, have in effect been mugged by this government, and beginning with the government with the 2 parties of opposition on this council. Year on year. And yet, every year, the proposals that the opposition here come to say, use your reserves, use your reserves. If you've been mugged and had lost £20, maybe you go into your savings account and get £20 out and cover it. We've been mugged year on year on year for 10 years. If we'd kept going to our reserves every year as you keep, there'd be none of them left. We cannot just go to reserves and use that money up every single year because you keep cutting the funds every single year. There'd be nothing left. The prudent way to do it is to make the savings we have to make. And that's what we've been doing. Councillor Brunt mentioned earlier that about the different funds we have, and that he mentioned the rainy day fund. That's just what it is, a rainy day fund. But the government that we have now of making it a rainy day and a rainy year every single year, and they've been doing it for 10 years, and that is what needs to stop. And we are protecting Merton residents from the damage that is doing in a business-like way, and I'm proud to support this budget because of that.
Councillor Southgate.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We appreciate the opportunity to comment on the various amendments. recognising that we're not really going to do justice to them in the short time available. A lot of work's gone into them. They are composites necessarily. We like some parts, not others. And if we abstain when it comes to the roll call, it's not because we're indifferent, I assure you. So if I can take the Lib Dem amendments first, because we received those first. Number one, in principle, we like the idea of piloting a scheme for free breakfast clubs for those on pupil premium, because of the well-documented evidence that children learn better if they are not starting the school day hungry. We also like the idea of hypothecating voluntary contributions for this, because we believe it will appeal to donors. Our reservations concern the longevity of such schemes. Westminster has banked its reputation on its pioneering scheme. We need to see how well it holds up in its second year. If the Merton scheme faltered, it could not be financed out of the OCPB reserve forever. Amendment 2, I've already highlighted the dangers of taking savings from the CFS budget, especially where they affect youth services. However, we don't agree with axing by Merton. We need a channel of communication that reaches all homes in the borough. You can't rely exclusively on smartphones and social media. And reducing the trades unions' facilities seems unnecessarily provocative for the amount saved. Amendment 3, I remember getting my fingers burned when I supported then Councillor Mary Jane Jeans to bring a motion that all contractor staff be paid the London living wage, the same as our staff here in Merton. And yet there is an element of hypocrisy, I suggest, if we knowingly perpetuate two pay scales, one for in-house staff and another for external staff. So we support this cautiously worded amendment to model the cost implications of paying the London living wage. Now, rather like the Lib Dem amendment, the Conservative amendment draws heavily on the OCPB reserve. Let me just remind you then that it will stand at 785,000 this time next year. It will then reduce to 390,000 the following year. It is not inexhaustible. But if it's no to the spend items, we do like very much the call for a new strategic vision. The July principles were drawn up in 2011. It was very much as a response to the age of austerity. We haven't revisited them since. It probably is time to review our risk appetite and set our sights beyond balancing the budget from year to year. Now, by risk appetite, I don't mean buying clapped-out shopping centres in Stockton-on-Tees. I do mean lifting our eyes to a more distant horizon
Time.
that takes...
Councillor Dehaney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, we all know that monies from government has a great impact on crime in London. And despite the cuts we are experiencing, Merton continues to be a borough with some of the lowest levels of crime. In the 12 months of September 2019, the borough registered an increase in knife crime of 20%, bringing the total to 245. Now, we know Safer Merton monitors knife crime offences, and they inform us that only 70 offences were classified causing any real physical injury. Then again, there is hate crime, Madam Mayor. Reports of hate crime amounted to 378. Again, in response, Safer Merton organized Hate Crime Awareness Week in October 2019. The aims were to raise awareness among residents and to increase confidence in reporting to the police. The event was well supported with representations from 8 secondary schools, the Youth Parliament, and the Hate Crime Strategy Group. So it shows that we are monitoring these things and we are making every effort, not only to complete it, wipe it out, stop it, but to wipe it out completely. As elected councillors, Madam Mayor, we have a duty to residents to ensure the borough is kept safe. With limited funds from the government, but with strong support from the Safer Merton team, we have maintained the borough as the 4th safest in London. Now, during the election in December, the government promised to provide more police for the Borough Commander Unit. And Madam Mayor, we are eagerly awaiting our share of the police. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I support this budget.
Councillor Andrew Howard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, budget council meetings can be dull and, frankly, depressing affairs. So I shall seek to lighten the mood. Quite a challenge, given the long faces and exasperated hand-wringing opposite. In truth, there's not been much to cheer them over the last 10 years, a decade dominated by Conservative governments following a policy of necessary financial prudence. Prudence. Cast aside by Gordon Brown, and then retrieved from the Treasury bin by the Tories in tackling Labour's deficit. Of course, Madam Mayor, Labour is the party that claims to have won arguments it has palpably lost, so it was easy for them to reinterpret history. Thus, Labour's legacy was relabelled Tory austerity, an expression which has punctuated Merton Labour excuses for underperformance ever since. I've got a tally running here and I've run out of paper from tonight's meeting so far. But enough gloomy history, I bring good cheer. Some post-election headlines, quote, biggest multi-billion-pound funding increase for councils in a decade. Quote, local authorities to receive a share of 49 billion. That's an extra 3 billion for English councils to spend in the coming year, and for Merton that's an extra 8.6 million. An inflation-busting 6% increase, which I commend to the party opposite. No cheers. How about the government's 1 million boost for pub-based community services? Is that support for small business worth a round of drinks? Perhaps not. No cheers there either. Oh dear, they do look glum. But then we've already seen Labour's sour reaction to the £500 million being invested in improved healthcare for Merton and its neighbours. Over the next 2 years, Madam Mayor, the residents of Merton will see the rest of the country moving forward while these Labour pockets of obstinate resistance stand still. I put it to you that in 2022, not even a Pritchard buyer's dream ticket will save Labour here.
Councillor Lanning.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, this evening I want to talk about how political values translate into policy choices, about how the services in which you invest and cut tell society what you're willing to lose and who you're willing to lose out. And Madam Mayor, in doing so, I need not talk about the type of society a Conservative government envisioned by making £12 billion worth of cuts to welfare or removing 23,500 police officers from our streets. I need not do so, Madam Mayor, because the values sitting behind those choices are clear. But while policies of this nature are easily translatable, cutting local authority funding by 77% over the last 10 years is not. Because the trickle-down reality of 1,000 small decisions taken in our meeting rooms, forcing 1,000 deductions from spreadsheets, is not headline news. But the impossible budgetary decisions forced upon us leads to the slow, incremental, and in some boroughs, devastating erosion of local services that leave gaping holes in communities. Madam Mayor, the disappearing libraries, leisure centres, clinics and job centres paint a picture of what life is like for millions of people who rely on public services. And while the closure of one library by one local authority, working hard to make the least worst decision, may not make front-page news in the same way that the bedroom tax did, what it represents is a far more insidious erosion of the very fabric of our society. By closing just one library, we remove one more shelter, learning hub and employment centre. We take away one more place to tackle loneliness and isolation, and we eliminate one more space to connect our diverse communities. And Madam Mayor, this is a reflection of government policy and government choices, with the Conservatives having presided over 800 such library closures over the last 10 years. But not in Merton. Even in the face of adversity, having to find over £26 million worth of savings in the next 4 years, we've shown leadership by investing in our people, our community, and our future, following the same principles that guided us when first elected in 2010. We've delivered 4,500 new school places, a new leisure centre, and a new library. We're continuing to support the most vulnerable and deprived through our council tax support scheme, campaign to save St Helier Hospital and welcoming 50 child refugees. And this budget says that not even government austerity will prevent us from delivering policy that promotes our Labour values. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Barlow.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, predictably, we've heard a lot tonight about austerity and the Council needing to tighten its purse strings. Another year of cut, budget and save. Strangely, though, we haven't heard, nor do we ever hear from members opposite, about how when it comes to using council funds to feather their political nest, they always manage to find the money. Money, for instance, to commission healthcare audit consultants to discredit the work of the staff of our NHS. Let's be clear, this isn't expert advice. The experts have given their advice. The experts are the NHS staff. Nor is it about reassessing the data and the case on all sides of the debate. They simply want to repeat the work done by the NHS because this didn't provide them with the answers they wanted. When you see this, along with the Council's own sham consultation, 3 questions on the Council's website which may as well be asking if the wards of St Helier should be paved with gold, not forgetting the spreading of misinformation on social media, you begin to see a pattern of something that looks a bit like funded political interference. At a time when, as we've heard from the Council leader, Councillor Allison and others, the Council does not have a penny to spare. Yet to link back to our own amendment, the money they are spending on this could be spent on providing the equivalent of 275 trees to improve our borough's air quality. Or in the case of the Liberal Democrat amendment, we could remove the introduction of charges for blue badges. And good news for Councillor Ward, you wouldn't even need to reuse reserves. But instead, it will be spent on a political hatchet job. They should be careful what they wish for. There is currently £500 million on the table to improve healthcare in our area. They've done this before and we've ended up with nothing. Let's not let it happen again.
Councillor Welton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A decade ago, a Labour-led administration took over the running of Merton Council after a disastrous 4 years of a Tory-run council. This happened at the same time as the Tories, ably assisted by the Lib Dems, took over national government. It is a decade which has not been without its challenges, and the situation in 2010, after 10 years of austerity, is even bleaker than when we first took over in 2010. Many councils are at breaking points, and the one-year local government settlement makes the outlook even more uncertain. As a council, this has not been easy. Year by year, we have had to make many difficult savings which have impacted upon service delivery as we have prioritised our expenditure in line with our Merton principles, which prioritise the most vulnerable people in the borough. But as a Cabinet member since 2010, I do feel incredibly proud of the number of things we have achieved as a Labour council. The lowest number of people living in temporary housing accommodation in London, bringing forward the £2 billion regeneration of 3 estates in the borough, High Path, Eastfields and Ravensbury, which will transform housing and provide much-needed new homes. Also the work we put in last year in improving housing enforcement, including the introduction of civil penalties and investigating the introduction of a selective landlord licensing scheme. Being prepared to take tough measures on emissions and air quality in the borough. Fighting for St Helier to ensure that an A&E, maternity and critical services remained on the site. I find it absolutely disgraceful that that is opposed by the Conservative opposition who want to move services to Leafy Belmont. This is the same Tory government who cut £400 million from the rebuilding of St Helier Hospital just 4 years ago. Let's say this. Don't say that winning power doesn't change things. It does, as Councillor Ward explained tonight, and that is why I am incredibly proud of what we have achieved as a Labour Council when faced with a Tory-led government since 2010 who have done immense harm to the fabric of this country through their spending cuts which have impacted on some of the poorest people in our borough. And tonight we have heard some of the back-of-the-envelope proposals from Councillor Holden. Let me say one thing about cycling. We do support more cycling, but we had a mini Holland scheme in the borough which would have transformed cycling. It was sabotaged by Councillor Dean working hand in hand with Richard Tracy, who opposed that scheme. We support more office accommodation in Wimbledon Town Centre, That has been opposed by Councillor Holmes' Tory colleagues, including one Councillor David Dean. No wonder he called off sick tonight. I commend this budget and I ask us to support it tonight. Thank you.
Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was going to start off with a joke about one of the speeches of one of the Labour councillors, but actually I've decided not to do that, because this is an amendment that we hope that everybody will be able to actually vote for. Thank you, Councillor Southgate, for your support. We're not in here spending any money. We're not taking any money from the reserves. We're gathering evidence. Now let's start with the issue of the London living wage and paying the London living wage to the staff of our contractors. I think that every member here would like to do that. I think the Conservatives would like to do it. I'm sure that the Labour members would like to do it. So let's work with contractors and understand what the costs and the benefits would be. Because yes, there are costs, but there are also benefits. Paying the contractor staff the London living wage would mean they had lower turnover. It mean they had higher productivity and lower training costs. People who aren't worrying about money so much all the time are going to work better and do a better job. And a better job, let's remember, looking after some of the most vulnerable people in our community. Then let's have a look at how effective some of the private providers of alternative education, pupil referral units are. And some concerns have been raised about those, and we need to understand if that's an issue. I was quite surprised to find and to hear that Merton has no appropriately located, dedicated unit for sexual and mental health support for young people who are escaping from exploitation. Let's have a look at whether we need somebody there. The theme of all of this, Madam Mayor, is building an evidence base. And if there's one thing we have in common, it's we support evidence-based policy making. Finally, there's parking charges. Now, we're not entirely convinced that there will be a 20% reduction in the use of cars in the borough. I know that the Labour members disagree. But if that reduction doesn't come about, then what this says is within the law, let's make sure that we use any extra money that's raised, because the assumption in the budget is there'll be a 20% reduction. Let's make sure we use that extra money on work on the climate emergency and air quality.
Councillor Pearce.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. We've heard a lot this evening about countless difficulties that are made and making budget decisions every year under annual cuts funding from the central government. Now, speaking as a member of the CYP Children's Committee, I'm very proud to be on this. I'm very proud to have been on it in all its forms over nearly 20 years. And I've chaired it several times, and I feel totally committed to it. It's not sexy having to go through 200 or 300 pages of details at committee meetings, but that is how the best decisions and what is best for our young people in their education, in their healthcare, in other committees, but also children's services and their futures come about. Making those decisions, it is very difficult to be. I was born in the 40s and brought up in the most Tory, inner London, rock-solid Tory borough under an endless Tory government. And I can tell you, going to school in the early mid-50s, I find it very difficult growing through my life with the poor education that I received. My reading, vocabulary, and maths are very questionable. But I would like to pick on Councillor Bakari's point. Going to school, seeing the children, trying to teach them when they're hungry, I can tell you, taking you back to those 50s, I and my colleagues from the poorest area in Chelsea, we were all hungry, which proves without doubt that Tories never change. They were disregarding young poor kids back in the 50s, and they're disregarding young poor kids now. Unlike Merton's Labour administration. We prioritise all children's education, all children's services, and all children's futures. That was before this meeting, and it will go on after this meeting. As long as we are in control of this council, every single child in this borough, whether they come from the richest family or the poorest family, will get every best that we can give them. I support this budget.
Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As Councillor Holden outlined in his speech, we believe in a technologically based approach to solving Merton's environmental challenges. For example, with the use of city trees and green walls. Madam Mayor, city trees are freestanding structures containing different types of moss which eat up harmful emissions. They have the power of 275 ordinary trees. They work all year round and vary in size, but take about 1% of the space of 275 trees. For example, the city trees installed at Labour Run, Waltham Forest, are 6 metres by 5 metres inside. They are portable and they can be moved to pollution hotspots. They also include benches and paid advertising. They cost about £30,000 each, and the benefit is in concentrated detoxification. Green walls, such as the one already in place at the All England Club, are an innovative and practical solution to the recently declared climate emergency. Green walls could be placed on many existing buildings in the borough. They could be used to replace school fences, for example, to clear the air at the new Harris Academy. They could be placed on the Civic Centre and other poor air quality areas. Our December manifesto called for tree-lined roads for all new housing. Our ambition for Merton is to have more trees on more of our streets more quickly. Madam Mayor, Merton should turn blue and go green.
Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Allison, I want to congratulate you and your team for the work you've done on the budget. Very difficult due to the austerity measures brought in by this Conservative government. I would like to thank you for looking after the most vulnerable in the borough of Merton. Due to the support we receive at Friends in St Helier, many older residents get a nourishing meal, help to keep fit, and prevented from isolation. Isolation of our older people leads to depression. Depression leads to bad diet, and bad diet is now recognised leads to dementia. This was never recognised by the Conservatives when Councillor David Williams led their group. He tried to stop this help and wanted to abandon the isolated vulnerable in our borough. So thank you, Councillor Allison, on behalf of the older residents of the borough of Merton, and that's why I support this budget.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can you tell me, what is the link between Thomas Cook's, Bon Marché, Jack Will's, Debenhams and the Bath store? Well, in the retail sector, some were so successful, there were very common names in the high street. Debenhams, indeed, was brought into the centre court in Wimbledon as the anchor store at the back to draw in the shoppers. They prided themselves, Madam Mayor, in their business-like strategies, expanded, were profitable, they had highly paid professional staff and boardrooms, and what they have in common is that they all went into administration in 2019. They did not adapt their business models to meet changing needs and technologies. Merton's cabinet are still clutching on to a strategic principle established in this council on the 13th of July 2011. a sclerotic leadership substantially unchanged by his own admission for more than a decade by Councillor Ambritus, and now more in tune with a Soviet-era gerontocracy, not in age, but in thinking and practice. And Councillor Pritchard agrees with me, because he forgot to tell you that Labour have been in charge here for 26 of the last 30 years, but it's only since he joined the council just under 2 years ago that he sorted out the pension fund and is now contributing huge sums of money for the Labour Party to spend. And that's what counts. Did we hear Councillor Alan Brittis's effort off? He was telling us about all this money. He's splashing the cash. Councillor Allison calls it a tool. He doesn't like to call it cash. It's a bit too gruesome. And others, Councillor Cooper Marbella told us about that. But Councillor Alan Brittis doesn't want to focus on the fact that they've got the money to do that, but he does want to tell you how they haven't got money to spend on other things. And our amendment tonight proposes spending £300,000 out of the 11.6 million that you underspent last year, Councillor Ward. This council needs new leadership. It won't be found behind me. It won't be found on the administration front bench. But right in front of me is a team with a vision for the future, full of new ideas, some of which are laid before you tonight, with the right questions to ask ourselves and the answer to the crucial question: how can we make life better for the residents who send us here to serve? I urge the council to support our amendment.
Councillor Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What is Merton Council for? It's a simple enough question. It's obvious neither Labour nor the Tories have a coherent idea. We saw this in the last election, of course. Labour knew they'd win and offered nothing, literally, not even a manifesto. The Tories knew that they'd lose and offered everything, from buying the odd police station to breaching various contracts. The budget and the Tory proposals carry on in that vein. Labour, where are the ideas? Where is the vision in this budget? Where is the political leadership? What are your ideas to actually improve people's lives? What we have, of course, is Councillor Alan Brittis tells us, we're businesslike, and Councillor Allison dutifully joins in, and then Councillor Pritchard started. And I owe you an apology, Councillor Pritchard. I thought you were after Councillor Alan Brittis' job last meeting. It's clear you're after Councillor Allison's job. And yes, it was very convincing. Yes, you've saved the pension scheme. We're pleased about that. But to be businesslike, a company needs a vision. Where is the vision? There's no vision there. That's the problem. We need a vision, although I'm not sure I'd like Councillor Holmes' vision of turning us all into property speculators. And I suspect neither Councillor Dean nor others would agree with him. Then we turn to the Tory amendment. All worthy ideas. Frankly, though, I'm not sure many of my Tory colleagues send their children to Merton State schools, because if they did, they would know that they all have whiteboards already. Hands up. Yeah. But there's no strategy to this. It's all worthy virtue signalling. Councillor Holden said it all. He told us that this once humble Brexit Tory had turned into an eco-Tory. These are not eco-Tories, these are ego-Tories. It's all posturing. It's all playing to the gallery. None of it's real. And then, of course, we go on to just pure fantasy. We're told that we need a realistic set of forecasting. Given the government won't give any information to local government about how it's going to be funded, what do you suggest? A crystal ball, perhaps? The point is that It just makes no sense. You put this here simply to appear on leaflets. You put provocative things on saying, look at the increased funding, forgetting the fact that you've increased it slightly this year, but you've cut it for year on year on year on year. We do have memories. This is pathetic stuff, and you know it. Please, please vote for our amendments and don't vote for their amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, this is the 10th council budget that has been delivered under Conservative austerity. And in that period, government cuts have harmed people's health and well-being and have widened health inequality across the country. Not my words, Madam Mayor, but the findings of Professor Michael Marmot, who 10 years after his landmark report has found that life expectancy in the past decade has stalled, the first time that has happened, Madam Mayor, since at least 1900. In our most deprived communities, Madam Mayor, life expectancy has actually declined, a fact that should both shock and shame us. Professor Marmot states that if health has stopped improving, it is a sign that society has stopped improving. The underlying causes of health inequality are both complex and multifaceted, Madam Mayor, but Professor Marmot is clear on one point. Citing the 7% cut in the ratio of spending to GDP and the 77% cut to local authority funding, he states that government funding cuts have affected the social determinants of health and that the government has not prioritised tackling health inequality. Madam Mayor, the Tories ask us to look at a strategy for the 2020s. They should be focusing on the mess they've made of the 2010s. If the Prime Minister was really committed to levelling up, Madam Mayor, he would address the chasm that Conservative austerity has created in the past 10 years between the way public services were funded by the last Labour government and the way public services are funded now. Madam Mayor, this budget demonstrates once more there is only one party committed to levelling up, only one party committed to bridging the gap, only one party committed to supporting our most vulnerable residents, and that is the Labour Party, Madam Mayor. When the government cut council tax benefit for those on the lowest incomes, Madam Mayor, this administration stepped in to plug the gap, one of the few local authorities to do so. When the government failed to address the chronic underfunding of adult social care, Madam Mayor, this administration put over £9 million into the budget, ensuring our most vulnerable residents were looked after. Now the government is shamefully neglecting to fund children's social care in the DSG, Madam Mayor. It is this administration once again which is providing the funding to ensure all of our young people have the very best start in life. Levelling up to this government, Madam Mayor, means promising a social green paper 3 years ago and then callously sitting on their hands. Meanwhile, thousands die waiting for their care packages and millions more have their needs unmet. Levelling up to this government, Madam Mayor, means delivering the worst ever performance in the 4-hour wait for A&E waiting times and responding by suggesting the target itself be scrapped. Levelling up to this government, Madam Mayor, and indeed to this Tory opposition, means spending £500 million to close essential services at St Helier Hospital, relied on by some of our most deprived communities, whilst not spending one penny redeveloping the Wilson Hospital, despite years of promises. Madam Mayor, this administration will continue to do all it can to bridge the gap and to level up, to deliver a more equal society and to support our most vulnerable residents, and yes, Madam Mayor, to campaign for St Helier Hospital. This is a budget which protects frontline services, supports our older and most vulnerable residents, provides more money to tackle fly tipping, commits millions of pounds for our young people, and continues to make Merton a great place for families, and I commend it to colleagues, Madam Mayor.
Councillor McCabe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wanted to spend some time congratulating the staff that we have who deliver adult social care. They do a fantastic job. And over the last few years, as the funding has been cut and yet demand has grown and grown, they've had to be more and more creative. And I think they deserve the congratulations of everyone in this chamber. And I was going to go on to talk about lots of the achievements during that period, but I've been provoked. I've been provoked by what I heard earlier in relation to St Helier Hospital. What strikes me, and I've been here a long time, is that there has always been a consensus in this council about St Helier Hospital. I know that there are some decent people the other side who've always been part of that political consensus because they recognised that it's really important. The most important job of any councillor is to stick up for the local community. But that consensus has been broken. It's been broken by an extremist new leadership. And it's all about sucking up to Boris, sucking up to his vanity project. And what does it actually mean? We just heard about the dangers and the difficulties created by the most deprived people. And what you are proposing to do is, what you are supporting is proposing... Madam Mayor, if I'm going to be interrupted, I'm asking for more time. Are we going to get silence or am I going to be allowed to speak? I'd like to ask your ruling on this. Thank you. So, Madam Mayor, what they are supporting is that we move the hospital, the A&E department and the maternity department away from the 47 most deprived areas surrounding the hospital towards a new hospital in Belmont supporting wealthy people in North Surrey at the expense of our local residents. Shame on you.
Councillor Irons. Councillor Irons.
Sorry, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. As in life, 10 years is a long time in politics. 10 years ago, Twitter was a lovely place to be. 10 years ago, we were recovering from the 2008 global financial crisis and looking ahead to London 2012. And 10 years ago, Boris Johnson was Mayor of London and showed more willingness to spend time on a zip wire than he does with flood victims today. This is a decade that has seen an attack on local government, with councils of all political colours losing 43% of their budget, watching their core spending power fall by 11% and being forced to increase their council tax to keep their heads above water. This is a decade that has resulted in a dramatic fall in living standards and has seen an erosion of hope, ambition and shared prosperity. Or, as best described by a UN investigation into this country's extreme poverty, this is a decade where much of the glue that has held British society together has been deliberately removed. British compassion has been replaced by a punitive, mean-spirited and often callous approach designed to impose a rigid order on the lives of those least capable of coping. This decade has meant that 70% of children growing up in poverty live in working households. It has meant that 4 million people go to work every day but do not earn enough to feed themselves and keep a roof over their head. It has meant that for too many, hard work no longer provides the path to prosperity it once did. So, with this in mind, and although some of our streets are carrying the hallmarks of austerity, I am proud of this council. I am proud that this council continues to step up, step in and fight for the people of Merton. Despite this government's hollow plans to fund our social care crisis with crumbs of investment that are designed to pit vulnerable adults against vulnerable children, it is this council that has delivered the money needed to plug the funding gap in the delegated schools grant. It is this council that has invested in our good with outstanding features children's services so that our looked after children are genuinely looked after, and it is this council who has delivered £10 million of funding for our voluntary sector because we know investing in them means we can strengthen our common community values. So yes, Madam Mayor, a lot can happen in 10 years, and in the face of this decade of Tory decline, this council has and will continue to step up, step in and fight for the people of Merton. I support this budget.
Councillor Christie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm proud to stand here tonight to support this Labour budget, the 10th Labour budget in Merton that has balanced books, all the while protecting the vulnerable, modernising services and ensuring that Merton remains a great place for families. Madam Mayor, as you will know, in 10 years we've not only kept all of our libraries open, but we've opened a new one, whilst councils up and down the country have closed theirs. We've opened a brand new leisure centre whilst other councils have cut back. We've significantly improved education, with Merton now rated in the top 3 areas in the country for pupil progress. And we've protected services for the most vulnerable in our society, because we on this side of the chamber know that it should never be those who are most in need who bear the brunt of the tough decisions that have to be made. We've achieved a lot in these past years, Madam Mayor, but it's not been easy. Since 2010, the Conservative and Conservative-led governments have cut funding for local councils by half. The Tories in Westminster, as part of their perverse ideological project to cut public services to the bone, have decimated local government. And every step of the way, they've been cheered on by local Conservative councillors. Madam Mayor, we face these cuts from central government with a business-like approach. But time and time again, the Conservative councillors in this chamber have tried to wreak havoc on the borough's finances. Whether that through their 2014 election time Fantasyland plan to actually cut council tax by 10%, or through their frivolous amendment tonight, the Tories have shown that they simply cannot be trusted with the money. Madam Mayor, we already know that the local Conservatives support plans to downgrade St Helier Hospital into a glorified walk-in centre. From Councillor McLean's comments tonight, it seems they now want to turn Merton Council into nothing more than a glorified recycling centre, recycling tired, old Thatcherite ideas about what government and local councils can do. But we on this side take a different view. I am proud to support a budget that protects our award-winning green spaces, that helps tackle the climate emergency, that provides council tax support for low-income families, and that invests in our schools, our children and our young people. I'm proud to support a budget that allows our communities to come together and thrive, and I'm proud to support a budget that takes a business-like approach to protecting our most vulnerable residents in the face of Tory austerity. Another one for Andrew Howard's tally.
Final speaker, seconder to main council report, Councillor Stringer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm proud to be seconding this budget. Not only is it a balanced budget, but it's one that delivers. It delivers for some of our most vulnerable children and young people. Delivers for the adults who rely on the council to provide them with care. It delivers for some of the poorest households in our communities. And it delivers for all residents who are proud of where they live and trust Merton Council to do the work needed to ensure that our borough reflects that pride. Our achievements and plans are all the more impressive given the funding pressures we are under. For years, we have been expected to do more and more with less and less. And nowhere is this more evident than in our services for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. Merton has a proud history of strong provision for young people who need extra support to achieve an education. But the changes that the coalition government introduced in 2014 were clearly not thought through. They extended our responsibilities to children as young as babies and adults as old as 25, but this was all to be funded out of the same block of the Dedicated Schools grant. That was never going to be sufficient to provide the quality of support we want to offer. Despite Councillor Gretton's attempts to dress up the small increase we had this year, the gap is still there, as it is for over 80% of local authorities. And don't just take my word for it. Whilst we've been in the chamber, Councillor James McInnes, the Tory councillor in Devon, has been leading calls for more funding on SEND and for schools more generally. It's all coming out tomorrow. But given that the government still hasn't answered where the funding is going to come from, we have made the sensible decision to make some provision for it of the predicted overspend. Madam Mayor, this is all exacerbated by the underfunding of our excellent schools, and just today, Jeff Barton, the General Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders, was also lamenting this. That is the message coming from the national representative of school leaders, and it's also the message that I hear from the head teachers when I speak to them. So I am amused that the Lib Dems and Tories think that they know better than school leaders. Rather than listen to what schools need, Tories think that what will help is more interactive whiteboards. Now, I've written a whole evidence-based report on the use of technology to improve learning. It includes a whole section on interactive whiteboards and the controversy. The only evidence of their positive impact is on the bank balances of the companies that sell them. Improving teacher practice and outcomes is a much harder task than introducing new kit. Head teachers know this. Merton School Improvements team know this. Also, the idea that this is a new technology shows that you have not been to a state school for decades. It's all about visualisers now. Teachers love visualisers, and you can go up to a child's work and show it. The Lib Dems, on the other hand, want us to magic up money out of thin air. Breakfast clubs are not a bad idea with some evidence behind them. But they are not what schools are demanding from us, and they do cost money. The Lib Dems are convinced that their voluntary tax will raise this, despite evidence to the contrary. Madam Mayor, we do listen to school leaders. Among other things, they tell us that they are struggling to provide the expert support needed for pupils with special needs. That's why some of the £2.8 million of net growth we ourselves at Merton are putting in from our general funds into children's schools families is for educational psychologists and dedicated SEND officers to ensure that schools, parents and young people get high quality support. The other achievements and plans outlined by the leader earlier show that we don't just listen to schools, but we listen to the rest of the community. And we take scrutiny seriously. And we would like to thank colleagues for their input. What we don't take seriously are last-minute suggestions driven by what would make a nice little Twitter post rather than serious policy. And while I love the idea of the Lib Dems wanting to scrap my Merton as if they don't value print material, because that is not the impression I got in December, given the watches of paper shoved through my letterbox. Madam Mayor, I would like to thank everyone whose work has gone into this budget. We look forward to delivering on our promises and fighting for further pursuits.
We have now gone through the list of expected members wanting to speak. If we are finished the debate, we will move to the votes. We will take each of the amendments first, in the order they were moved. I call for a roll vote on the Conservative budget amendment.
Councillors, when I read your name, please will you indicate whether you're voting for or against the amendment or not voting. Councillor Akagina. Against. Councillor Alan Bretus. Against. Councillor Allison. Against. Councillor Anderson. Against. Councillor Attawar. Against. Councillor Bailey. Not voting, sorry. Councillor Barlow. For. Councillor Bembo. For. Councillor Bakari. Councillor Braund. Councillor Brunt. Councillor Adam Bush. Councillor Omar Bush. Councillor Butler. Councillor Byers. Councillor Christie. Councillor Chung. Councillor Cooper Mabaya. Councillor Cowper. Councillor Crowe. Councillor Curtin. Councillor Dahani. Councillor Draper. Councillor Fairclough. Councillor Gould. Councillor Gretton. Councillor Holden. Councillor James Holmes. Councillor Howard. Councillor Irons. Councillor Kenny. Councillor Kirby. Councillor Kohler. Councillor Lanning. Councillor Latif. Councillor Macaulay. Councillor Makin. Councillor McCabe. Councillor McGrath. Councillor McLean. Councillor Moulton. Councillor Mundy. Councillor Ormrod. Councillor Pearce. Councillor Pritchard. Councillor Quilliam. Councillor Simpson. Councillor Southgate. Councillor Stanford. Councillor Stringer. Councillor Ward. Councillor Welton. Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Williams. Deputy Mayor Councillor Foley. The Mayor Councillor Howard.
So we have 16 for, 30 against, 10 not voting. The amendment is lost. I call for a roll vote on the Liberal Democrat Amendment 1.
Councillor Akagina. Councillor Allenbritis.
Against.
Councillor Allison. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Attawar. Councillor Bailey. Councillor Barlow. Councillor Bembo. Councillor Bakari. Councillor Braund. Councillor Brunt. Councillor Adam Bush. Councillor Omar Bush. Councillor Butler. Councillor Byers. Councillor Christie. Councillor Chung. Councillor Cooper Marbaya. Councillor Cowper. Councillor Crowe. Councillor Curtin. Councillor Dehani. Councillor Draper. Councillor Fairclough. Councillor Gould. Councillor Gretton. Councillor Holden. Councillor Holmes. Councillor Howard. Councillor Irons. Councillor Kenny. Councillor Kirby. Councillor Kohler. Councillor Lanning. Councillor Latif. Councillor Macaulay. Councillor Makin. Councillor McCabe. Councillor McGrath. Councillor McLean. Councillor Moulton. Councillor Mundy. Councillor Ormrod. Councillor Pearce. Councillor Pritchard. Councillor Quilliam. Councillor Simpson. Councillor Southgate. Councillor Stanford. Councillor Stringer. Councillor Ward. Councillor Welton. Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Williams. The Deputy Mayor, Councillor Foley. The Mayor, Councillor Howard.
Not voting. I have 10 for, 30 against, 16 not voting. The amendment is lost. I call for a roll vote on the Liberal Democrat Amendment 2.
Councillor Akagina. Councillor Allenbritis. Councillor Allison. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Attawar. Councillor Bailey. Councillor Barlow. Councillor Bembo. Councillor Bahari. Councillor Braund. Councillor Brunt. Councillor Adam Bush. Councillor Omar Bush. Councillor Butler. Councillor Byers. Councillor Christie. Councillor Chung. Councillor Cooper Marbaya. Councillor Cowper. Councillor Crowe. Councillor Curtin. Councillor Dehani. Councillor Draper. Councillor Fairclough. Councillor Gould. Councillor Gretton. Councillor Holden. Councillor Holmes. Councillor Howard. Councillor Irons. Councillor Kenny. Councillor Kirby. Councillor Kohler. Councillor Lanning. Councillor Latif. Councillor Macaulay. Councillor Makin. Councillor McCabe. Councillor McGrath. Councillor McLean. Councillor Moulton. Councillor Mundy. Councillor Ormrod. Councillor Pearce. Councillor Pritchard. Councillor Quilliam. Councillor Simpson. Councillor Southgate. Councillor Stanford. Councillor Stringer. Councillor Ward. Councillor Welton. Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Williams. The Deputy Mayor, Councillor Foley. The Mayor, Councillor Howard.
I have 23 for, 30 against and 3 not voting. The amendment is lost. I call for a roll vote on the Liberal Democrat Amendment 3.
Councillor Akagina. Councillor Allen-Britus. Councillor Allison. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Attawar. Councillor Bailey. Councillor Barlow. Councillor Bembo. Councillor Bakari. Councillor Braund. Councillor Brunt. Councillor Adam Bush. Councillor Omar Bush. Councillor Butler. Councillor Byers. Councillor Christie. Councillor Chung. Councillor Cooper Mabaya. Councillor Cowper. Councillor Crowe. Councillor Curtin. Councillor Dehani. Councillor Draper. Councillor Fairclough. Councillor Gould. Councillor Gretton. Councillor Holden. Councillor Holmes. Councillor Howard. Councillor Irons. Councillor Kenny. Councillor Kirby. Councillor Kohler. Councillor Lanning. Councillor Latif. Councillor Macaulay. Councillor Makin. Councillor McCabe. Councillor McGrath. Councillor McLean. Councillor Moulton. Councillor Mundy. Councillor Ormrod. Councillor Pearce. Councillor Pritchard. Councillor Quilliam. Councillor Simpson. Councillor Southgate. Councillor Stanford. Councillor Stringer. Councillor Ward. Councillor Welton. Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Williams. Deputy Mayor Councillor Foley. The Mayor Councillor Howard.
I have 26 for, 30 against, no one not voting. The amendment is lost. We will now turn our attention to a vote on the substantive budget report. Councillor Allen-Britis, would you like to use your right to reply on the substantive motion?
As we're a business-like authority, let's move to the vote.
I now call for a recorded roll call vote to formally agree the main budget report.
Councillor Akagina. Councillor Allen-Britus. Councillor Allison. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Attawar. Councillor Bailey. Councillor Barlow. Councillor Bembo. Councillor Bakari. Councillor Braund. Councillor Brunt. Councillor Adam Bush. Councillor Omar Bush. Councillor Butler. Councillor Byers. Councillor Christie. Councillor Chung. Councillor Cooper Mabaya. Councillor Cowper. Councillor Crowe. Councillor Curtin. Councillor Dehani. Councillor Draper. Councillor Fairclough. Councillor Gould. Councillor Gretton. Councillor Holden. Councillor Holmes. Councillor Howard. Councillor Irons. Councillor Kenny. Councillor Kirby. Councillor Kohler. Councillor Lanning. Councillor Latif. Councillor Macaulay. Councillor Makin. Councillor McCabe. Councillor McGrath. Councillor McLean. Councillor Moulton. Councillor Mundy. Councillor Ormrod. Councillor Pearce. Councillor Pritchard. Councillor Quilliam. Councillor Simpson. Councillor Southgate. Councillor Stanford. Councillor Stringer. Councillor Ward. Councillor Welton. Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Williams. The Deputy Mayor, Councillor Foley. The Mayor, Councillor Howard.
Not voting. We have 33 for, 7 against and 16 not voting. The budget report is carried. With no further business, I declare the meeting of the Council closed.